I'm Sharon, 28 and 3 years ago. I thought I had it all figured out when I married Walter. Now I'm sitting alone in an apartment that feels too big and too empty, wondering how I managed to throw away a perfectly good life. I met Walter right after I'd broken up with Vince. Vince and I had been together for 2 years, and it was intense. The kind of relationship where you can't keep your hands off each other 1 minute, and then you're screaming at each other the next. My friends always said we had this electric connection. Looking back, they were probably just describing toxicity with a prettier word. But I was obsessed with him. When Vince finally broke things off because he wasn't ready to settle down, I was crushed. Walter was different from the beginning. He was stable, kind, and actually called when he said he would. He had a good job, and had owned his own condo, and had this calm confidence I found so reassuring after the constant drama with Vince. Within a year, Walter and I were married, and I convinced myself I was happier with this peaceful life than I ever was on the emotional roller coaster with Vince. Then I got pregnant. We were both excited, Walter especially. He turned our spare bedroom into a nursery, read all the baby books, and came to every appointment. When our son was born, I suggested the name Vincent, telling Walter it was after my grandfather. That was a complete lie. There was no Grandpa Vincent. I just couldn't let go of my past. I guess. Walter loved the name. Completely oblivious to the fact that I'd named our son after the ex-boyfriend I couldn't forget. After Vincent was born, everything changed. Walter was still Walter. Supportive, loving, present. But I was drowning in diapers, sleepless nights, and a body that didn't feel like mine anymore. Walter would come home from work, tired, but would still take Vincent from my arms, giving me time to shower, or just breathe. He tried so hard, but instead of appreciating him, I found myself getting annoyed at how he loaded the dishwasher, or how he'd ask what I wanted for dinner, when I clearly had no energy to make decisions. Small, stupid things. Meanwhile, the first started scrolling through old photos on my phone during those late-night feedings. Photos of Vince and me from years ago. I told myself it was just nostalgia, that I was just missing who I used to be before I became someone's wife and someone's mom. Around Vincent's first birthday, I did something I knew was wrong. I reached out to Vince on Facebook, just a casual "Hey, how have you been?" with a recent photo of me where I actually did my hair and makeup. I told myself there was nothing wrong with catching up with an old friend. Vince didn't respond for 3 days, and I checked my phone obsessively when he finally did. It was like being hit with a wave of emotions. I thought I'd buried. "Wow. You still look amazing," he wrote. "Life's been crazy, but I think about you all the time. You were the one that go away." You know, our messages quickly became more frequent and intense. He'd disappear for days sometimes, then come back with messages like, "I miss your laugh so much." Or, "I was just thinking about that weekend at the beach house." He'd say things like, "I wish you were here with me right now instead of with him. And no one gets me like you do." When I sent him a selfie after getting my hair done, he replied, "Damn, he looks so good. He doesn't deserve you." It was toxic, and deep down I knew it. But it felt like oxygen. After months of feeling like I was suffocating in my perfect little life, Walter noticed I was on my phone more but didn't question it. Instead, he tried harder, planning date nights, bringing home my favorite takeout, even scheduling a cleanings to come twice a month so I'd have less to worry about. "You seem a million miles away lately," Walter said one night as we got ready for bed. "I just want to make you happy again. Tell me what you need." "I'm fine," I said, not looking up from my phone, "just tired." The next day, Vince sent me a message saying, "Send me a pic of you now. I need to see your face." And I found myself taking selfie after selfie until I found one I thought looked good enough. "Beautiful," he wrote back. "But I miss seeing all of you." I knew what he was asking for. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I was a mother, a wife. But that night, after Walter fell asleep, I sent Vince exactly what he wanted. And somehow, in my twisted logic, I convinced myself it wasn't really cheating because it was just pictures. It wasn't physical. As the weeks went on, my conversations with Vince got more intense. Each message was like a drug. I'd feel this rush when I saw his name pop up on my screen, followed by this desperate need to respond immediately. Meanwhile, Walter was working overtime to try to reconnect with me, coming home with little surprises that I found forced and trying too hard. "You know what I love about you?" Vince messaged one night. "He never needed anyone to take care of you. You're not like other girls who just want security." It was exactly what I wanted to hear, and I was special, different, not boring like I felt in my marriage. The fact that Walter was literally taking care of me every day, helping with Vincent, paying our bills, being a responsible partner suddenly seemed like evidence that I'd settled, rather than something to appreciate. I started hiding my phone whenever Walter was around. I'd take it into the bathroom with me, or wait until he was busy with Vincent to respond to Vince. I'd stay up after Walter went to bed, telling him I wanted to watch TV, when really I was messaging Vince. Soon, our phone conversations turned into explicit messages and inappropriate pictures. I sent him photos. I would die if anyone else saw. He told me in graphic detail what he wanted to do if we were alone together, all while Walter was trying harder than ever to fix whatever was wrong in our marriage. The night everything fell apart started like any other. Walter came home from work early to help with Vincent, taking over baby duties so I could shower and have some time to myself. He even ordered dinner so I wouldn't have to cook. After we put Vincent to bed, Walter suggested we watch a movie together. I agreed, though I kept my phone in my hand waiting for Vince to respond to my earlier message. Sharon, can we talk? Like, really talk? Walter asked after noticing me checking my phone again. About what? About us. About what's happening here. He gestured between us. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't even know why. I've been trying everything I can think of to make you happy, but nothing seems to work. I'm just tired, I said, using my standard excuse. It's not about you. I don't believe that, Walter said quietly. We used to be a team. Now it feels like we're living separate lives under the same roof. Is there someone else? Walter asked directly. My heart stopped. What? No. How could you ask me that? Because you're always on your phone. Because you pull away when I touch you. Because you seem happy sometimes for no reason and then disappointed without explanation. Walter looked at me for a long moment, then stood up. I think I'm going to go to bed. I'm tired of feeling like I'm fighting for someone who doesn't want to be fought for. I watched him walk to our bedroom, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. I picked up my phone again and saw Vince had finally replied. I can't stop thinking about you. Send me another pic. Something just for me. I glanced toward the bedroom, then quietly took a revealing photo and sent it. He responded immediately. You're so hot. I want you so bad. He must be blind or stupid not to appreciate what he has. I went to the bedroom to find Walter reading in bed. I changed into my pajamas and got into bed beside him. Walter put his book down and turned off his lamp, then lay with his back to me. After a few minutes, he rolled over and touched my shoulder. Sharon, he said softly, I love you. Whatever is wrong, we can fix it together. The genuine emotion in his voice made my chest hurt. He moved closer, his hand gently caressing my arm, clearly wanting to reconnect physically. I didn't push him away, but I didn't encourage him either. His touch felt foreign, somehow. Wrong. He must have sensed my hesitation because he stopped. What is it? He asked. What am I doing wrong? Nothing. I lied. I'm just not in the mood. You're never in the mood anymore, he said, frustration finally creeping into his voice. Not just for sex, but for us. For anything involving me. That's not true. I protested weakly. Then what is true, Sharon? Help me understand what's happening. I couldn't tell him the truth. So instead I said nothing. Staring at the ceiling, Walter sat up, turning on his lamp again. I can't do this anymore. This silence, this distance. It's killing me. Just tell me what you want. What I wanted was the excitement Vince made me feel without the complications. What I wanted was impossible. Walter was looking at me so intently, his eyes pleading for something I couldn't give him. And in that moment, frustrated by his neediness, annoyed by his persistence, I muttered under my breath what I thought was too quiet for him to hear. I miss how Vince made me feel. The second the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Walter's expression changed instantly. His face draining of color. He'd heard me every word. Who the hell is Vince? He asked. His voice dangerously quiet. The silence that followed my slip was deafening. My mind raced for an explanation. Any explanation? But the look on Walter's face told me it was too late for lies. He's an old friend, I stammered. A friend, Walter repeated, his voice hollow. And what exactly do you miss about how this friend made you feel? I said nothing, panic rising in my chest. Walter reached for my phone on the nightstand. I lunged for it, but he was faster. Walter Dart. If he's just a friend, you won't mind me looking right. I watched in horror as he unlocked my phone. He knew my password. Of course he did, and began scrolling through my messages. His expression changed from suspicion to shock to disgust as he read the exchanges between Vince and me. His hands started shaking. What is this? He whispered. These pictures. Sharon, what have you been doing? It's not what it looks like, I said desperately. We were just talking. Just talking. This isn't just talking, this is. He stopped abruptly, staring at the screen. Wait. Vincent. You named our son after him? The blood drained from my face. I'd never considered that Walter would make that connection. No. I lied automatically. Vincent is named after my grandfather. You know that. Your grandfather? Walter repeated flatly. The grandfather you never mentioned before you were pregnant. The grandfather none of your family ever talks about. He stopped, a terrible realization dawning on his face. There is no grandfather, Vincent. Is there? My silence was answer enough. Walter stood up, still clutching my phone. Who is he to you? An ex? Someone you worked with? My ex-boyfriend. I whispered. From before I met you. How long has this been going on? Nothing's going on, I insisted. We're just talking. Stop lying, Walter shouted, making me flinch. He never raised his voice. I can see the messages, Sharon. I can see the pictures you sent him. My God, you named our child after him. How could you do something so disgusting, so disrespectful? I had no defense. Instead, I went on the attack. You don't understand. You don't make me feel the way he does. Walter laughed bitterly. The guy who's asking you for pictures while I'm taking care of our son. The guy who hasn't had to deal with midnight feedings or diaper changes, or any actual responsibilities. That guy. He threw my phone on the bed and walked to the closet, pulling out a duffel bag. What are you doing? I asked, panic rising. What does it look like? I'm leaving. I can't even look at you right now. Walter, please. I said, suddenly desperate. It was just messages. It didn't mean anything. He turned to me. His eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. If it didn't mean anything, why did you do it? Why did you hide it? Why did you name our son after him? I had no answer. Walter stuffed clothes into the bag haphazardly. I need to get out of here before I say something I'll regret. I'll be back tomorrow to see Vincent and figure out what happens next. But we're done. Sharon. No one comes back from this kind of betrayal. It was just words. I protested. I didn't actually cheat on you. Walter paused, looking at me with disgust. You really don't get it, do you? This is cheating. The lies, the secrets, the emotional intimacy with someone else. That's cheating. And naming our child after him. That's a whole other level of betrayal. I don't even have words for. He zipped up the bag and walked toward the door. I followed him, tears finally streaming down my face. Please don't go. I begged. Think about Vincent. Walter stopped at the mention of our son's name, his shoulders tensing. I am thinking about Vincent. That's the only reason I'm not saying what I really want to say to you right now. He turned to face me one last time. We're getting a divorce. I'll be back tomorrow to work out temporary arrangements for our son. And with that, he walked out. I stood in the silent apartment, the weight of what I'd done finally hitting me. Walter made good on his promise to return the next morning. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but his voice was steady as he laid out his terms. I'll take Vincent to my brother's for the weekend, he said. We'll need to work out a temporary custody arrangement until the divorce is finalized. After Walter left with Vincent, the apartment felt suffocatingly empty. I checked my phone. Vince had responded to my desperate message from the night before. Damn. That's intense. You okay? What are you going to do now? Not. I'm sorry. Or this is partly my fault too. Just curiosity about the drama. I don't know. I texted back. He's talking about divorce. He took Vincent for the weekend. That's rough, Vince replied. Want to meet up? Might help to talk in person. Despite everything falling apart around me, I felt a surge of excitement. Yes, I replied immediately. When? Tonight. My place. I'll order some food. I agreed without hesitation, spending the rest of the day alternating between panic over my imploding marriage and anticipation about seeing Vince. When I arrived at his apartment that evening, he greeted me with a long hug that turned into something more. The chemistry was still there, exactly as I'd remembered. Within an hour, I crossed the final line. What had been an emotional affair became physical, and in the twisted logic of the moment, I justified it by telling myself my marriage was already over. Afterward, lying in his bed, reality started to creep back in. What am I going to do? I asked. More to myself than to him. Vince shrugged. You'll figure it out. You always do. Now we'll figure it out. Not I'm here for you. Just a casual dismissal of the crisis I was facing. My whole life is falling apart, I said. Walter's talking about getting lawyers involved. That sucks, Vince said, his attention already drifting to his phone. Hey, I've got an early meeting tomorrow, so the dismissal was clear. I'd given him what he wanted, and now he was done. At least for the moment. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated itself. My parents called, devastated. My friends texted, some sympathetic but most shocked at what I'd done. Walter's family, who had welcomed me as one of their own, now treated me like a stranger during custody exchanges. Through it all, Vince remained inconsistent, passionate, one day distant the next. He'd invite me over, then cancel at the last minute. He'd bombard me with messages, then disappear for days. It was exactly how he'd behaved when we dated years ago. But now I was too emotionally dependent on him to walk away. 2 weeks after Walter left, Vince invited me to bring Vincent over to his apartment. I should meet the little guy, he said, since we're getting serious again. Vincent was fussy that day, overtired from the disruption to his routine. When he wouldn't stop crying at his apartment, I saw a flash of annoyance cross Vince's face. Does he ever stop? He asked. He's a baby, I said defensively, and he's been through a lot of changes. Vince shrugged. I guess. Look, maybe this isn't the best time. Why don't you drop him off with your parents or something and come back later? Just us. That was the first moment I felt a real pang of doubt about what I was doing. But instead of listening to it, I called my mom and asked if she could watch Vincent for a few hours. She agreed reluctantly, her disappointment evident in her voice. 3 months after Walter walked out, I was living in a smaller apartment with Vincent. Half the time the divorce proceedings were underway, with Walter being surprisingly civil for someone I'd hurt so deeply. He spoke to me only about Vincent, his tone businesslike and distant. Vince had settled into a pattern of seeing me once or twice a week, always at his convenience, never making concrete plans or commitments. I'd started to notice the red flags I'd ignored before. How he only called when he wanted something. How he never asked about Vincent. How he made excuses when I needed support. One morning, after Vince had canceled plans for the 3rd time in 2 weeks, I woke up feeling nauseous. I bought a pregnancy test, and there it was. 2 pink lines that changed everything yet again. When I told Vince, his reaction was exactly what I should have expected, but somehow still shocked me. Are you sure it's mine? He asked immediately. Yes, I said, hurt by the implication. Walter and I haven't been together since before he left. Vince ran a hand through his hair, pacing his living room. This is not what I signed up for, Sharon. I'm not ready to be a dad. You think I planned this? I asked incredulously. I'm already a single mom half the time. The last thing I wanted was another baby. Right now. So what are you going to do? He asked, the emphasis on you saying everything. Don't you mean what are we going to do? I corrected. He looked at me for a long moment. Look, I care about you. But I never said anything about settling down. Especially not with someone else's kid already in the picture. And another on the way. He didn't call. He didn't text. After a week of silence, I went by his apartment only to find he'd blocked my number. The doorman told me he'd instructed them not to let me up. I'd been completely cut off. The next day was a custody exchange with Walter. As I handed Vincent over, Walter noticed something different about me. Are you sick? He asked, the first personal question he'd asked in months. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option left. I'm pregnant, I said quietly. Walter stared at me, connecting the dots immediately. He let out a short, bitter laugh and shook his head. Oh, well, he said finally. Looks like I dodged a bullet. The words stung because they were true. Walter hadn't walked out because he stopped loving me. He'd walked out because he respected himself too much to stay with someone who betrayed him so completely. And now, watching him strap Vincent into his car seat with gentle care. Vincent, the son he loved unconditionally, despite knowing he was named after another man. I realized what I'd thrown away as Walter's car pulled out of the parking lot. I caught a glimpse of someone in the passenger seat, a woman with dark hair. My stomach twisted with an unexpected jealousy. Walter was moving on. Of course he was. Any woman would be lucky to have him standing alone outside my apartment building, one hand resting on my still flat stomach. I faced the consequences of my choices. I would soon be a single mother of 2 children with different fathers. The passionate relationship I'd convinced myself was worth destroying my marriage for had been nothing but a fantasy. And the stable, loving partner I'd taken for granted was gone forever. I wish I could say I learned some profound lesson from all this, that I grew as a person, or found some deeper understanding of myself. But the truth is, I'm still that same selfish woman who whispered. I miss how Vince made me feel and shattered her family. I still find ways to blame everyone but myself. Walter, for not being exciting enough. Vince for leading me on, my friends, for encouraging me, my hormones for the pregnancy. Deep down though, in the moments of honesty that come late at night when I can't sleep, I know the truth. I did this, all of it. And unlike fairy tales or movies, there's no magical third act where everything works out. There's just me picking up the pieces of the life I broke, wondering if someday I'll find someone who makes me feel special without seeing my selfishness for what it is. But first, I'll have to learn to live with the whispered words I can never take back. Here's the next story. Darren Blackwood put his key into the front door of his colonial-style home in Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood where success was defined by square footage and German automobiles. The property had once been his pride and joy, a symbol of his 15-year career aspirations at Meridian Technologies. It now fell hollow, a nicely adorned shell holding a marriage as chilly as the marble countertops his wife Valerie insisted on during their most recent renovation vow. He called out, his voice echoing throughout the two-story entryway. There was no response, as predicted. Darren untied his tie and made his way to the kitchen, where a handwritten note was on the island. I had to depart immediately. Mom's condition has gotten worse. I'll be staying with her for several weeks. We will call when I am available. He groaned and ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair. Ruth, Valerie's mother, had been suffering what his wife described as a complex disease for several months. When he asked for details, they were invariably foggy. These unexpected travels had become increasingly common over the last year, coinciding with the growing distance between them. At 43, Darren had painstakingly planned his life. The son of a steel mill worker from Pittsburgh, he put himself through college, acquired an MBA, and fought his way into the cutthroat computer sector using only his intelligence and tenacity. Being the director of operations at Meridian was the result of years of hard work, missed weekends, canceled vacations, and countless 18-hour days. He opened the fridge, took a beer, and went to his home office. A family photo on the wall drew his attention. He and Valerie are on their 10th anniversary trip to Santorini. Her auburn hair blew in the Mediterranean breeze, and both of them smiled. It felt like a lifetime ago. Darren and Valerie met in their late 20s, while he was still a project manager and she was a marketing executive for a competitive company. Their courtship had been frenetic, intense, passionate, and ambitious. Two motivated professionals who understood one another's desire for achievement. After 8 months, they married, merging their ambitions and resources in what Valerie dubbed a power merger. After 13 years, the merger was showing alarming signs of collapse. Darren relaxed onto his leather chair and opened his laptop. A job would distract him from the developing emptiness in his personal life. He was working out the details of Project Phoenix, Meridian's most ambitious product launch to yet. The project was his creation, a groundbreaking cybersecurity platform that would propel Meridian to the forefront of the industry. If successful, it would result in a big promotion, possibly even a position on the executive board. His immediate employer, Wade Preston, the senior VP of product development, was originally hostile to the initiative, but Darren went directly to CEO Lenora Washington, who saw its potential right away. Wade's resistance had morphed into hesitant cooperation once the CEO gave her approval. However, the hostility between them has only grown in recent months. Wade Preston hailed from a wealthy family with Ivy League roots, everything Darren was not. At 51, Wade exuded the assurance of someone who had never actually struggled, who saw himself as entitled to success rather than having to work for it. His slick-back hair was always neatly styled. His bespoke outfits are outstanding. His Connecticut accent was a frequent reminder of their diverse upbringing. As Darren studied the project timeline, a notification appeared on his screen. Preston sent an email moving their 9 a.m. meeting at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. Darren mumbled. Another power play. Wade knew Darren coaches nephew's baseball team on Tuesday evenings and was always at work by 8 a.m. on Wednesdays. His phone vibrated with a text message from Miles Ramirez, his best buddy since college, and Meridian's top information security officer. Drinks tomorrow. Need to talk? Important, Darren texted back. Preston rescheduled our meeting for 7:30. How about lunch instead? Miles's response was swift. Perfect. The usual place. 1 p.m. Darren worked until midnight, then crawled into the vacant king-sized bed. He reached for his phone to call Valerie, then paused. It was after midnight, and if her mother was sick, he didn't want to bother them. He tried again in the morning, but his wife had not responded. His calls went directly to voicemail. Hello, Val. Just checking in. I hope your mom is doing well. Let me know if you require anything. The initial meeting with Preston was typically frustrating. Wade nitpicked tiny minutiae of the Phoenix project, calling into question judgments that had been authorized months before. I am concerned about the timeline, Blackwood, Wade stated, reclining back in his chair with casual arrogance. The board is not sure that we will be able to deliver by Q3. The crew is on track, and we've planned for contingencies. Darren responded, keeping his voice level. Wade halted. As the progress reports show that reports can be faked. I need to see actual improvement. Darren bit back his displeasure. You are welcome to join any of our daily stand-ups. The team is solid. Wade waved his hand dismissively. Simply make sure it does not fail. If the project fails, the board will remember who pushed for it. By the time Darren met Miles for lunch at Lorenzo's, an Italian bistro a few blocks from the Meridian building, his patience was getting thin. Miles was already at their normal corner table, drinking sparkling water. Miles, 42 had the athletic build of someone who still played competitive basketball on weekends. His dark eyes sharpened when he saw Darren. "You look like hell," Miles muttered as Darren slid into the booth. "Preston is on the warpath again," Darren said, ordering an iced tea from the passing server. "What makes this so important?" Miles looked around before leaning forward. "Look, dude, I contemplated telling you this, but as your friend, I couldn't keep it to myself." Darren felt his stomach tightening. "What is it?" "You know how it works. Random security checks on executive communications. Only standard checks for questionable activity." "Yeah. Compliance things. How about it?" "Miles." His expression became grim. "I found something. Wade has been interacting with someone from Archer Systems. Meridian's primary opponent was Archer Systems." Darren frowned. "That isn't necessarily unusual. People have industry contacts. These were not professional contacts, Darren. He has been releasing internal documents, particularly those pertaining to Phoenix." Darren felt blood drain from his face. "Are you sure?" Miles nodded. "Positive. And there is more. He's been trying to undermine you in front of the board, claiming that the project's shortcomings are the result of your leadership rather than the challenges we foresaw." "That snake," Darren mumbled. "But why are you taking the risk of telling me this? If someone discovered out?" "Because there is something else." Miles interrupted. "Something personal." He paused. "When is the last time you heard from Valerie?" The rapid shift in subject caught Darren off surprise. "She is at her mother's. We had been there for several days." "Why?" Miles. His countenance changed from concern to discomfort. "Darren. Ruth Conway died 3 years ago. Valerie's mother has died." The world seems to shift beneath Darren. "What?" "No. That is not possible. Val has been visiting her. Taking care of her. I came across Ruth's obituary when cross-checking some employee information. In May of 3 years ago, I experienced heart failure. There is no misunderstanding." Darren's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the facts. If Valerie weren't with her mother, where have you been going all this time? Which one had he been with? "There's one more thing," Miles added gently, slipping his phone across the table. On the screen was a photo of Wade Preston's Hamptons beach house, which is routinely featured in business social events. Valerie's white Mercedes convertible was in the driveway. Miles explained that this was taken yesterday. "But my cousin lives nearby. I asked him to drive by after I assembled these parts." Darren stared at the image, a peculiar serenity coming over him as the parts came into place. The late-night texts, the unexpected trips. Wade is becoming increasingly hostile. Darren had visited the gorgeous beach house on company getaways and had complimented Wade on the gourmet kitchen, which Wade claimed had been designed by a famous chef. The kitchen, where his wife was most likely preparing meals for his opponent. "I apologize, Guy." Miles replied, recovering his phone. "I thought you should know." Darren nodded slowly. His thinking had already shifted from astonishment to calculating. "You were correct to tell me and Miles. Thank you." The rest of lunch was a haze as Darren processed the treachery. By the time he returned to his office, the first astonishment had faded into icy determination. He would not react hastily. He would not confront them immediately. First, he wanted additional information. That evening, he sat in his home office and started digging. He accessed their shared cloud storage and discovered deleted travel receipts and hotel reservations dating back 18 months. He checked their combined credit card bills and saw patterns of transactions made, while Valerie was apparently with her mother. Expensive restaurants in the Hamptons. The boutiques surrounding Wade's beach house. Most damningly, he discovered a folder containing photographs. Valerie had neglected to delete all intimate photos of her, and they had waited together on his yacht, in his beach house, and in a bed Darren had stayed in during work retreats. His wife and boss had not simply betrayed him. They'd been flaunting their affair in the same places. Darren had been making his profession and marriage become a big joke at his expense. As daylight broke, Darren stood in the shower, allowing the searing water to wash over him. His way was clearer now. This wasn't only about infidelity or professional competition. This was about dignity and fairness. Reclaiming would have been robbed from him by deception. Preston and Valerie thought they could dump him both personally and professionally. They believed he was weak, pathetic, and easily exploited. They were about to discover how mistaken they were. For the next week, Darren maintained a veneer of normalcy. He attended meetings, fine-tuned Project Phoenix details, and even texted Valerie on her mother's improving health. All while planning the first phase of his response to their betrayal. Darren used his technical knowledge and Miles' subtle advice to deploy a complex monitoring system. He enabled location monitoring for Valerie's devices, using their shared family account. He recovered deleted text messages with backup software. He planted small, covert cameras in their home. capturing Valerie's infrequent excursions to get clothes or mail when she thought he was at work. Miles' access to Meridian's internal conversations was particularly valuable. Despite technically crossing an ethical line, Miles believed that Wade's corporate espionage and attempts to destroy Darren's project warranted the intrusion. Miles explained that he was not giving you full access, only enough to protect yourself. The facts Darren obtained provided a complete picture of the conspiracy against him. It was more than just an affair. It was a deliberate attempt to remove him from both his marriage and his career. Wade and Valerie have been together for about 2 years. What had started as flirtation at corporate functions had grown into a full-fledged partnership, with a shared future that necessitated removing Darren from the picture. Their scheme was elegantly simple. Wade would progressively erode Darren's standing at Meridian, making a case for his dismissal once Project Phoenix was begun. Meanwhile, Valerie emotionally distanced herself, finally filed for divorce when Darren's professional standing was jeopardized. Their prenuptial agreement had a stipulation that reduced Valerie's payment drastically if she was unfaithful, but without evidence, it would be his word against hers. Most troubling were their casual text discussions about their plans. Val, is he suspecting anything? Way, Blackwood, not a chance. He was too concentrated on his beloved project. The board meeting went great. The seeds of skepticism had been formally seeded. Val, how about Lenora? She has always favored him. Wade is working on her, indirectly implying that his work is influenced by Archer's platform. She began to listen. Wow. Perfect. There are 2 more months till the launch fails. Then we are free. I can't wait to redo the kitchen at the beach house. Your bachelor's appliances are terrible. Their belief in his ignorance strengthened Darren's resolve. They assumed he was ignorant, concentrating on his project as they demolished his life around him. They had no idea he was now monitoring their every move, chronicling every betrayal, and planning his counterstrike during this surveillance phase. Darren also found an unexpected ally in Bridget Navarro, Lenora Washington's executive assistant. Bridget had been with Meridian for nearly 20 years, beginning as a receptionist and progressing to become the CEO's right hand. At 58, she had a commanding presence, with her beautiful silver bob and penetrating eyes. Bridget was aware of everything that happened at Meridian. Darren has always had a respectful and pleasant connection with her. Unlike Wade, who treated her with the callous contempt reserved for those he thought were beneath him, Bridget had been aware of the campaign against Darren as a result of the disparity in treatment. Mr. Blackwood, she explained, appeared at his office door one afternoon. Have you got a moment? Darren welcomed her and closed the door behind her. I'll be direct, Bridget stated, perched primly on the edge of the visitor's chair. Mr. Preston has been talking to Miss Washington about Project Phoenix. Not favorable. Darren nodded. I suspected as much. What you may not be aware of is that he has been scheduling these chats right before your update sessions, purposefully sowing suspicions that you then unknowingly walk into. I appreciate your knowledge, Bridget. May I ask why you are telling me this? Bridget's expression stiffened. I've been with Meridian since before Mr. Preston arrived with his Harvard MBA and father's connections. I've seen how he operates and eliminates threats. She had already straightened her posture. Perfect posture. My late spouse worked in steel. I started on the floor, just like your father. He rose through the ranks to become foreman based on merit rather than relationships. I admire folks who have earned their positions. Darren examined her. You know a lot about me, Mr. Blackwood. It is my job to know things, and I am aware that Mr. Preston has accessed confidential personnel files. You're specifically searching for flaws. This was new information. Thank you for informing me. Bridget rose to leave, then paused. One more thing. Your wife called the office last week, searching for Mr. Preston. Why? Said he was at his beach house. She seemed to be familiar with the site. She mentioned something about leaving her jewelry in the regular drawer. I was interested about that. Darren kept his cool, but inside he added this to his mounting evidence. Very weird, really. Bridget nodded once. Mr. Blackwood, I believe in this company. I believe in merit and integrity. Whatever happens next, remember that you have allies who share your ideals. After she departed, Darren added Bridget to his mental chessboard as a potential queen for the game he was creating. Her inside information would be valuable, and her commitment to the company's actual interests was consistent with his goals. By the end of the second week of surveillance, Darren had gathered extensive documentation about both the affair and the professional sabotage. He now grasped the whole nature of their scheme, including its flaws. Wade had been supplying Archer Systems selective information in order to position himself for a prospective senior post. If his attempt to gain more authority at Meridian failed, he'd skillfully manipulated the board's impression of Project Phoenix. allowing him to take credit for its triumphs, while blaming Darren for any failings. Meanwhile, Valerie was gradually liquidating some of their shared interests, building a financial cushion for herself while undermining Darren's position. She'd even begun speaking with a divorce lawyer who specialized in avoiding prenuptial agreements. Armed with this information, Darren began developing his counter-strategies. This would not be a straightforward confrontation or emotional outburst. It would be a meticulously planned campaign to retrieve what was rightfully his, while holding those who had deceived him accountable. The approach would necessitate patience, precise timing, and strategic risk. It would develop in stages, each designed to isolate, expose, and eventually destroy Wade and Valerie at their own game. As Darren honed his strategy, he understood it wasn't all about vengeance. It was about restoring justice, rectifying an imbalance, and ensuring that merit and honesty triumphed over deception and entitlement. Wade and Valerie had underestimated him due to his lowly background. They mistake his hard ethic for weakness, and his focus for inattention. They were going to face the terrible opponent they had created via treason. The endgame would necessitate accuracy. Darren would have to neutralize Wade professionally, while also confronting Valerie's betrayal. The two goals were connected, but required separate strategies. Wade believes the approach should be corporate and planned, using his unethical actions against him to protect Project Phoenix and Darren's position at Meridian. Valerie needed to face a more personal reckoning, one that addressed the emotional and financial consequences of her treachery. As Darren lay out the steps of his plan, Valerie's mom texted that she was feeling much better. "Are you planning a trip home this weekend? I miss you." Darren looked down at his phone with a frosty smile. He typed his response while murmuring, "Perfect timing. Wonderful news. I miss you too. Cannot wait to see you." The first confrontation was about to start. Thursday evening, Darren sat in the parked vehicle, half a mile from Wade Preston's Hampton Beach home. The light faded as dusk fell over the wealthy neighborhood. He looked through binoculars and saw Valerie's white Mercedes in the driveway next to Wade's Aston Martin. Miles's cousin's surveillance photos were accurate. He informed Valerie that he had a late meeting and would not be home until after midnight. The lie came easy, as did her fabrications about her dying mother. At 8:42 p.m., Darren drove gently past the house, confirming the silhouettes of two persons moving around the kitchen. They were preparing dinner, content in their shared domesticity. He parked down the street and waited until 10:15 p.m., when the lights in the main living area dimmed through the wide windows that overlooked the ocean. He could see the flickering glow from what appeared to be a fireplace. Darren approached the house on foot, using the entrance code he'd seen Wade enter on a company retreat the year before. The security system was deactivated with a quiet beep. He entered quietly through the side door leading to the gourmet kitchen. The house was peaceful, with the exception of faint music from the living room. Jazz. Wade's chosen background for what he considered elegant evenings. Darren could hear quiet talking and occasional laughs. He proceeded through the kitchen, spotting the remains of their dinner, 2 empty wine glasses, and plates containing what appeared to be seafood risotto, Valerie's favorite dish, which she said Wade made better than any restaurant chef. Darren hesitated at the kitchen entryway. He took a moment to calm his breathing. The evidence in front of him confirmed everything he'd learned during his inquiry. Seeing physical evidence of their mutual intimacy, her cardigan tossed over a kitchen chair, his tie thrown casually on the counter, made the betrayal feel viscerally real. He crept slowly down the hallway toward the living room, halting just before the entry. He could see them from his location, but they weren't instantly noticeable. Wade sat on the plush sectional sofa, Valerie nestled against him, her head on his shoulder, and they drank a bottle of fine red wine. Only 2 more weeks. Wade was saying this while stroking Valerie's auburn hair. The Phoenix launch will fail spectacularly, and your husband's career at Meridian will end. Valerie giggled softly. And the divorce papers will be ready for service the next day. The timing could not be more ideal. Have you chosen how you are going to play it? Wade inquired, refilling their cups. The bereaved widow supporting her unsuccessful husband, or the enraged spouse who can't stand his professional incompetence? I am thinking something in between. Valerie mused. Supportive, yet concerned, suggesting that a fresh start somewhere else, far from Meridian, would be beneficial for both of us. That way, when I file for divorce a few months later, it won't appear related to his career failure. Wade chuckled. Brilliant, as always. That's why we create such an ideal team. Valerie shifted to face him as she spoke about teams. Have you informed Lenora about the executive position at Archer, or are you still playing both sides? We took a long gulp of wine, leaving my options open. If I can capitalize on Phoenix's failure and Preston's early retirement, I will take a seat at Meridian. If not, Archer's offer is very generous. And where do I fit into these plans? Valerie asked, a tinge of insecurity in her voice, which Darren had rarely heard during their marriage. Wade kissed her forehead. Naturally, I'll be by my side. Once you're free of Darren and I've secured either post, we'll move forward together. I've already chatted with a realtor regarding properties in Greenwich. Valerie smiled, clearly pleased. And Darren Blackwood will become yesterday's news. A footnote in the company's history. The working-class lad who overestimated his ability and failed. Nobody will remember him a year from now. Darren had heard enough. He stepped into the doorway and applauded slowly. A fascinating strategic planning session. Do not allow me interrupt. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Valerie sprang upright, spilling wine on her blouse. Wade's face drained of color as he struggled to stand. Darren. Valerie gasped, her amazement giving way to a quick calculation obvious in her gaze. This is not as it appears. Darren finished. His voice was unnervingly calm. I believe that's exactly what it looks like. My wife and my boss are planning the deliberate downfall of my career and marriage, while drinking a fairly lousy Cabernet. Wade soon recovered, his aristocratic features hardening into the condescending mask he donned. Breaking and entering at the Blackwood office is a criminal act. I recommend that you leave immediately before I call the authorities. Darren grinned coldly. Please call them. I'm confident they'd be interested in the corporate espionage proof I've gathered. Sharing confidential Meridian information with Archer Systems is significantly more dangerous than my use of a security code that you foolishly exposed at the last corporate retreat. Wade's confidence wavered visibly. What exactly are you talking about? Oh, Wade, I have copies of everything. Each email, text, and file transfer. Did you really believe our security staff would not detect strange access patterns? Particularly to Phoenix? Document? Valerie stood, smoothing her clothes. Her first amazement giving way to the ease and assurance that drew Darren in years before. Darren, let's talk about this sensibly. Like adults, yes. Wade and I have developed affections for one another. These things happen in marriage. But these claims of corporate spying are ridiculous, and, frankly, beneath you. Darren focused his attention on his wife, as if he was seeing her for the first time. How is your mother, Val? She is still healing from her illness. Remarkable development for a woman who passed away 3 years ago. Valerie paled, but immediately recovered. I can explain it. It's complicated. No, it's actually quite simple, Darren interrupted. You have been lying about everything for years. You returned to Wade, and you've been conspiring to derail my career while sleeping with my spouse. Also simple. Wade moved to the side table, where his phone was. This conversation is done. I want you out of my home. I'm leaving, Darren explained gently. But first, let me explain what happens next. He took out his own phone, which showed a screen with active audio recording. The entire interview has been recorded, including your statements about Phoenix sabotage and business espionage. I have comparable recordings from the past week, as well as evidence of unlawful file access and communication with Archer Systems. Wade lunged for the phone, but Darren quickly sidestepped him. Copies have already been secured elsewhere. Attacking me will not change this. Valerie approached warily. Darren, be reasonable. What do you want? Money? Acquire divorce? Name your terms. Darren gazed at her with real curiosity. Do you truly know me this little after 13 years of marriage? This is not a negotiation. Valerie. This is a notification. You two felt I was pathetic. Easily controlled. Your treason went unnoticed because you were too busy working. He grinned without warmth. You were wrong. He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. One more thing. I would not bother coming into the office tomorrow or Monday. In fact, you might wish to call your attorney. You'll need representation. Valerie screamed out to him as he went away. Her voice is losing its calm edge. You are making a mistake, Darren. This will not go well for you. Darren returned one final time. It has already not gone well for me, Val. The difference is, things are about to get considerably worse for both of you. The drive home was unusually tranquil. The confrontation had proceeded exactly as anticipated. He confirmed their plan, documented their admissions, and determined the psychological gain. They now knew he was aware of their betrayal, but they were unaware of the entire scope of his counteroffensive. When he got home, he poured himself a rare drink of scotch and phoned Miles. When his pal responded, he stated, "It's done. Phase 1 is complete." How did they respond? Miles asked. Exactly as expected. Shock. Then denial. Then there are threats. They still underestimate me. What happens next? Darren took a sip of scotch and enjoyed the burn. Tomorrow, we will accelerate. Are you certain you want to be involved in this? There is still time. Take a step back. Wade's actions jeopardize the company's security. My direct duty. Miles responded firmly. And you, my friend? I'm in. Then get ready. Tomorrow will be an eventful day. After hanging up the phone, Darren opened his laptop and transmitted a number of encrypted files to designated targets. Evidence packages were meticulously crafted to each individual's role. In what would happen to Bridget Navarro, documentation of Wade's sabotage attempts against Lenora Washington. Evidence of corporate espionage was sent to the company's legal counsel. Records of Wade's interactions with Archer Systems. Finally, he sent Valerie one last text. I'll be removing your belongings from the residence this weekend. Do not bother coming home. Her response arrived almost instantly. You have no rights. We need to talk about this as grown-ups. Darren didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. The time for talking has already passed. Now it's time to take action. The next morning, Darren came to Meridian at precisely 7 a.m., significantly ahead of most employees. As expected, Bridget Navarro was already sitting at her desk outside Lenore Washington's office. She acknowledged Mr. Blackwood with a small nod. Miss Washington expects you at 7 p.m. Thank you, Bridget, he responded, recognizing the subtle clue that she had gotten his files and had already scheduled the key meeting at 725. As Darren waited in the small conference room next to the CEO's office, his phone buzzed with several notifications. Wait. Preston was attempting to contact him? 3 missed calls and a string of increasingly urgent text messages. We need to talk before you act rashly. This is a misunderstanding that can be corrected. Don't give up your career because of marital issues. Darren turned off his phone as Lenora Washington entered the room, followed by Bridget and Stanley Warner. Meridian's top legal officer, Lenore, maintained a grim face. Her generally pleasant attitude was replaced with the calculating focus that had propelled her to the top of the industry's CEO rankings. Darren, she murmured, taking a seat at the head of the table. I have reviewed the materials you sent. Stanley has been with me since 5 a.m., discussing everything. Before we start, I need to hear directly from you about what is going to happen in the next 30 minutes. Darren revealed proof of Wade's business espionage and systematic efforts to destroy Project Phoenix. He was clinical, focusing entirely on the professional treachery and ignoring the human aspect involving Valerie. After he finished, Stanley Warner spoke for the first time. The evidence is powerful and very disturbing. If even half of what you've stated is correct, Mr. Preston may face serious legal liabilities and criminal charges. Lenora stared at Darren closely. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Darren said. I needed to be certain. Wade is well connected and highly respected. I couldn't make these claims without irrefutable evidence and a personal angle. Lenora inquired pointedly. Bridget indicated that there could be issues concerning your wife. Darren retained his professional demeanor. My marriage is a distinct issue that I am addressing discreetly. It has no influence on the current corporate security challenges. Lenora nodded, seemingly content with his compartmentalization. We need to move fast. Stanley initiates security steps for potential corporate espionage. Bridget, deactivate all Wade's access credentials and call an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. She turned back to Darren. Can you ensure that Project Phoenix's integrity has not been jeopardized as a result of Miles's involvement? We have been doing a complete security examination for the previous week. The fundamental design is safe. However, certain peripheral documentation may have been compromised. We can change our launch plan accordingly. Good. Lenora spoke decisively. I want you to have direct control over all elements of Phoenix, beginning immediately. Wade's team is now reporting to you. She checks her watch. He generally arrives about 8:30. We will have security meet him at reception. They completed the meeting. Lenora held Darren back. One more thing. I don't know what's going on in your personal life, and I don't need to. However, if you require additional time or assistance, please communicate this. Thank you, but I am fine. Darren reassured her. Work is the most effective distraction right now. The disturbance began at 8:45 a.m., while Darren was in his office. Through his glass walls, he could see security leading a visibly irate Wade Preston to the elevators. Wade spotted him and made a sudden detour, getting away from the security squad to crash through Darren's door. You snake! Wade shouted. His neatly maintained facade is entirely cracked. You self-righteous, working-class serpent. Do you have an idea who you're dealing with? Oh, my family knows. Darren stayed seated, unnervingly calm. I understand exactly who I'm dealing with. Wade was a privileged, entitled fraud who believed that his connections would shield him from the consequences of his conduct. Security intervened, holding Wade's arms. Mr. Preston, you need to join us right now. This is not over. Blackwood. Wade spat as they dragged him backwards. You have created an enemy. You cannot afford it. Valerie never loved you. She'd been laughing at you for years. We both were. After Wade was removed, Miles arrived in the doorway. That was as dramatic as expected, Darren said, straightening papers on his desk. Is everything ready for phase 2? Miles nodded. The board has received a preliminary security breach report. Legal is preparing a legal complaint against both Preston and Archer Systems. And, as you requested, I have secured all of the Project Phoenix materials. Perfect. Any additional issues? The locksmith finished at your property an hour ago. The new security system is operational. I have personnel watching the property in case she shows up. Darren nodded in appreciation. Thank you, Miles. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can, Miles said with a little smile. You simply do it less efficiently. How about tonight's confrontation with Valerie? That is proceeding as planned. Darren confirmed that she was unaware of Wade's expulsion. That gives me an advantage, because Miles has left. Darren turned to stare out the window at the metropolitan skyline. Phase 1 exposure was completed. Wade Preston's career at Meridian was virtually gone. After reviewing the evidence, the board would have no choice but to fire him, and probable criminal charges for corporate espionage would assure he could not find a safe haven at Archer Systems or any other reputable company. Now it was time to deal with the personal betrayal, the more difficult but equally important confrontation with Valerie. She had texted frequently during the morning, with her messages ranging from defensive to conciliatory. We need to talk. This is not what you think. 13 years of marriage warrants a chat. Not anything you've planned. Thank you, Darren. Let us meet. I can explain anything. Her recent message had a different tone. Wade isn't answering the phone. What did you do? Darren had not replied to any of them. Valerie used words as her primary weapon. She manipulated through discussion and emotional pleas intended to elicit uncertainty and vulnerability. He would not give her that opportunity. Instead, he planned for her to learn the consequences of her betrayal in real time, just as he had discovered the truth about their lie. At 5:30 p.m., Darren departed the office after checking that the emergency board meeting had ended as scheduled. Preston's employment was terminated effective immediately, with legal procedures underway. The board unanimously authorized Darren's promotion to interim senior VP of product development, in charge of all projects, including Phoenix. As he drove home, Valerie sent him one last text. I'll be at your house tonight. We need to talk. This has gone too far. Darren gave himself a faint, unpleasant smile. She had no idea how far it would go. Valerie Blackwood's white Mercedes came into the colonial driveway at 7:42 p.m. From his seat in the shadowy home office, Darren observed through the slats as she sat in the car for several minutes, obviously composing herself or even practicing what she would say. She finally emerged, smoothing her costly blazer, which served as her armor in unpleasant conversations. Darren stood still as she approached the front door. He heard her key in the lock and was confused when it didn't turn. Then came the doorbell. 3 sharp rings appear in short succession. When there was no response, she started calling his phone. Darren let it go to voicemail while continuing to study her through the window. Her irritation was visible in her increasingly anxious gestures as she paced the front porch. Finally, she started beating on the door. Darren, I know you are in there. Open the door now. Only then did Darren proceed confidently through the gloomy home to the front door. He unlocked it but stayed, blocking the entrance. Valerie accused him of changing the locks as she attempted to shove her way inside the house. Darren did not budge. This is still my home, she argued, her voice rising. You cannot shut me out of my own home. Actually, I can, Darren responded evenly. The house is in my name, always has been. Remember how you insisted on keeping your financial holdings separate for the sake of independence? Valerie's expression moved, striving to find a new perspective. Look, I understand you're angry. You have every right to exist. But this changing of locks, whatever you did to Wade today, is an overreaction. We need to discuss this carefully. There is nothing to discuss, Darren said. Your belongings are packed in the garage. I will open it before I go. Take what's yours and leave. Leave. Where are you going? That is no longer your problem. Valerie's measured demeanor began to deteriorate. You cannot do this. We are still married. I have rights. Rights. Darren interrupted, his serenity eventually giving way to restrained wrath. Consider the right to lie about your mother's death for 3 years. The right to collaborate with my boss to ruin my career. Those rights. Valerie insisted it wasn't like that. We've had a poor relationship for years, Darren. You were always busy and focused on your precious projects. Wade and I, it simply happened. Affairs just happen. Val. Systematic deceit and professional sabotage take organization, work, and commitment. Darren's voice hardened. You exploited my late mother-in-law as a cover story for 2 years. You talked about damaging my career over dinner. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending that it simply happened. Valerie changed tactics, her visage softening into the vulnerable look she had honed during their marriage. Whenever she wanted something, I made a horrible mistake. I am aware of this. But 13 years together must count for something. We may try therapy for a fresh start. Stop. Darren abruptly ordered a halt. There is no scenario in which we can reconcile. Not after what I overheard last night. The working-class lad who overestimated his ability and failed. That was what you said about me, Val. Yours and Wade's. Her eyes expanded with real surprise. Were you taping us? I captured everything. Every conversation between you and Wade over the last 10 days. Meeting in which he undermined my project. Admission of your intended divorce approach. Behind Valerie's eyes, a new calculation appeared imperceptibly. Those recordings will not stand up to court scrutiny. Not without consent. They will absolutely not overturn the equitable distribution legislation for marital assets. When we get divorced, Darren, cut in. You will receive exactly what the prenuptial agreement states in the event of adultery. Which, as you recall, is substantially less than you expected. You can't prove infidelity without the unlawful recordings. Valerie countered boldly. Darren grinned coldly. I do not need the recordings. I have the text messages. You failed to permanently erase the hotel receipts. Photos from Wade's yacht. Most significantly, Wade signed a sworn statement this afternoon as part of his separation deal with Meridian, which details your relationship, in exchange for lower legal consequences. This final realization struck like a physical blow. Valerie staggered slightly. Wade would never. He pledged to confront this together. Wade Preston has ancient money and Ivy League connections. Darren added, echoing her prior statement. Men like that put themselves first. Always. He threw you under the bus within an hour of being hauled out of the premises. Valerie's calculated expression turned to genuine terror as she considered the ramifications. Then it quickly hardened into something else. Rage. Do you think you have won? She hissed. This is just the beginning. You have no idea what I am capable of, or what we are capable of together. Wade may have tripped today, but his family has unimaginable connections to board members, investors, and politicians. They will smash you. They can try, Darren said, unconvinced. But, unlike you and Wade, I have never misjudged my opponents. I've predicted every move you might make next. While you were plotting my demise, you considered every conceivable counterattack. I was ensuring yours. He walked back and started to close the door. Your belongings are in the garage. Take them. Then leave. My lawyer will contact you regarding the divorce process. Valerie's poise crumbled when the door closed. This isn't over, Darren, she cried through the door. You're going to regret this. I swear you'll regret it. Inside, Darren leaned against the door, listening as her ranting faded into the sound of the garage door opening, boxes being moved, and then her car starting and driving away. Only then did he allow himself to experience the full force of the confrontation. Despite his controlled demeanor, seeing Valerie, the woman he had loved and made a life with for 13 years, converted into a nasty foe for his wife had been extremely painful. The mask had come off completely, revealing the calculating, vicious individual who had been hiding in plain sight throughout their marriage. He poured himself a scotch and sat in the darkness of his living room, giving himself exactly 30 minutes to process his loss. Not that of the woman who had just left. She had never genuinely existed, but he had assumed that by living together, they were creating the future he had envisioned. When the 30-minute period was out, he had fully given up his trust. He drank his drink, put the glass down, and returned to his office. There wasn't time for prolonged sorrow. Valerie's warnings were not empty. She and Wade would retaliate. He needed to prepare. The following days delivered the exact counterattacks that Darren had predicted. Wade's family connections were strong, and they were used against both Darren and Meridian Technologies. The first salvo came from Wade's father, Leonard Preston, who was a substantial investor in several Meridian-related enterprises. Contracts were suddenly being reviewed. Partnership discussions were postponed indefinitely. The message was clear: backing Darren Blackwood would be costly. Meanwhile, Valerie launched her own onslaught. Despite Darren's proof of her cheating, she filed for divorce, citing emotional desertion and financial exploitation. She hired Camden Thornhill, a controversial divorce lawyer known for his harsh tactics and media manipulation. Within days, carefully produced leaks appeared in industry newspapers, implying that Darren had created evidence against Wade out of professional jealousy and to deflect from his failing marriage. Most disturbing was the concerted attack on Project Phoenix. Wade's technical requirements were leaked to Archer Systems, and they suddenly appeared on their product roadmap. with faster development deadlines that would beat Meridian to the market. Simultaneously, key members of the Phoenix development team received attractive job offers from Archer and competitors, an obvious attempt to recruit talent and destroy the initiative. Darren had anticipated all of this. He had not completely considered the personal cost of fighting on numerous fronts at the same time. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were neglected. His focused to a single objective: survival and vindication. Miles was discovered in his office late one evening, surrounded by documents on many computer screens showing project deadlines, legal pleadings, and financial estimates. "When is the last time you slept?" Miles asked. Darren looked up distractedly as he sat with a container of food on his desk. "I slept a couple hours last night." "Lying does not suit you," Miles responded, pulling the food closer. "Eat this as we speak." As Darren grudgingly began eating, Miles informed him of the newest happenings. First and foremost, the board is standing steady in the face of public and family criticism. Lenora called in favors and stabilized the crucial partnerships Leonard was attempting to undermine. And the bad news? Archer is accelerating their development. They are claiming a launch date 3 weeks before Phoenix's scheduled release. Valerie's counsel also filed more motions today. Something concerning hidden assets and commercial interests. Darren nodded. "I expected both developments. Archer's haste will lead to security flaws. We need to document them when they go live. It will show that they took an incomplete version of our requirements." He pushed aside the divorce paperwork. "Allow Valerie to waste money on fishing trips, as per her assertions. There is nothing to find." Miles looked at his friend with concern. He knew they were going to fight back. But this is becoming personal for them, particularly Valerie. Camden Thornhill does not simply attack assets. He destroys reputations. "Are you ready for how horrible this might get?" Darren's expression stiffened. "They made it personal when they decided to ruin what I had built. Miles, I am not simply defending myself anymore. I'm making sure kids realize the implications of their decisions." "What are your next steps?" "Acceleration," Darren replied, turning one of the monitors towards Miles. "We're moving up. Phoenix's updated debut date is 4 weeks from now. A full 2 weeks before Archer announces its release." Miles appeared stunned. "That is impossible. We can't compress the development schedule too much without sacrificing quality." "We can and will." Darren maintained that I had rearranged development priorities and redistributed resources. "The main security features are solid. We concentrate on those and leave the periphery components for after-launch improvements." Darren recognized that the team will push back. "Those who do may depart. I just want folks that believe in what we are creating." Miles heard resolve in his friend's voice. "What about Valerie's divorce proceedings?" "Thornhill is promoting a media narrative in which you are an obsessive workaholic who neglected his wife and is now using corporate resources for personal vendettas." "Let him," Darren remarked dismissively. "Corporate achievement speaks louder than tabloid allegations. When Phoenix launches successfully ahead of time, the story will change. Success is the best defense." After Miles went, Darren returned to honing his counter strategies. Phoenix's accelerated timeframe was bold yet attainable. The team would require more resources and incentives, but the overall design was sound. Beating Archer to market would negate the advantage Wade had hoped to gain by releasing specifications. Regarding Valerie and her legal attacks, Darren had already shifted his divorce case to Spencer Coleman, a methodical family law attorney who specializes in high-conflict divorces involving prenuptial agreements. Unlike Thornhill's flashy style, Coleman labored quietly and methodically to create precise evidence that could withstand emotive appeals and media manipulation. The next step in Darren's plan requires a more direct approach to countering Wade Preston's influence. Despite his dismissal from Meridian, Wade was using his family connections to undermine the company and, by extension, Darren's position. This needed to be addressed directly through Bridget Navarro. Darren scheduled a meeting with Lenora Washington at her private apartment on Sunday morning. Away from the office and any potential leaks, Lenora's modern penthouse had magnificent views of the city, with early sunshine spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows as they sat in their minimalist living area. Lenora, who was pouring coffee for them both, assumed this wasn't a social call. Darren responded directly. "I need your support for an aggressive countermeasure against the Prestons. Wade's father is methodical in his attacks on our partnerships. We must respond with equal ferocity." "I am listening." Darren presented his idea: a strategic cooperation with Sumitomo Technological Enterprises, a Japanese company that was one of the Preston family's main business competitors. The collaboration would grant Project Phoenix exclusive distribution rights in Asian areas, thereby cutting off expansion potential for any rival products, including Archer's version based on the stolen specifications. Sumitomo has been after us for years, Darren explained. They've always been eager to negotiate good terms, but we were hesitant because of the Preston family's prominence in European markets. With that relationship already strained, we have nothing to lose but everything to gain. Leonora pondered the proposal carefully. The board will be concerned with further organizing the precedents. The Prestons are already determined to destroy us. Darren countered. This is not escalation. It is a strategic realignment, based on changing circumstances. Moreover, Sumitomo's market presence in Asia is stronger than Preston's European ties. It is a net positive for stockholders. Following additional discussion, Lenora decided to propose the partnership idea to the board with full support. However, she warned, be prepared for growing antagonism from the Prestons. Leonard does not take kindly to being outmaneuvered. I am counting on it. Darren responded, his demeanor betraying nothing about his overall strategy. The following week saw a sequence of measured maneuvers and countermoves. The board narrowly authorized the Sumitomo cooperation. As expected, Leonard Preston replied by seeking to persuade several important Meridian investors to reconsider Darren's promotion to acting senior vice president. Leonard had not anticipated Darren's preparation for this very circumstance through Bridget. Darren had previously scheduled meetings with the hesitant board members, offering them with comprehensive forecasts of Phoenix's market potential through the Sumitomo distribution network. Despite Preston's persuasion, the data were compelling enough to preserve their support. Meanwhile, Valerie's legal campaign escalated. Cam and Thornhill filed petitions requiring full financial disclosure of not only Darren's personal accounts, but also any potential future remuneration tied to Project Phoenix, in a clear attempt to position Valerie for a claim based on the project's success. Despite the constraints of prenuptial agreements, Spencer Coleman replied with documented proof of Valerie's systematic liquidation of joint investments prior to filing for divorce. A clear example of intentional financial scheming that breached the prenuptial agreement. Thornhill filed motion after motion, each with the goal of draining Darren's resources and attention rather than achieving specific legal objectives. Coleman replied by limiting court attendance and focused on written submissions that required less of Darren's direct participation. Throughout it all, Darren remained focused on Project Phoenix and the development team, inspired by his unshakable devotion and rewarded by hefty bonus structures, accepted the increased deadline and worked around the clock. They enhanced the main security architecture wall by selectively postponing less critical elements for several weeks after announcing the faster timeline. Phoenix was preparing for its soft launch, a limited distribution to select clients and industry analysts to create market presence before Archer could perfect their competitor product. The night before the soft launch, Darren stayed late at the office to examine the final technical specifications and marketing materials. His workplace phone rang as he was about to close his laptop and head home for some sleep. The number was unknown, but he felt obligated to respond to Blackwood. He asked bluntly, "Is this victory everything you hoped it would be?" Wade Preston's voice was slurred, but identifiable. Darren pondered hanging up, but instead sank back into his chair. "It's not about winning, Wade. It's about the repercussions. Consequences?" Wade responded with a sour laugh. "You have destroyed everything. I built my career and reputation. Even Valerie is backing away now that my family's support is waning. You destroyed those items yourself." Darren responded equally. "I simply made sure you couldn't escape the consequences. My father is preparing to escalate beyond your expectations." Wade cautioned, his tone shifting between threat and desperation. "Leonard Preston does not lose business conflicts. There is a first time for everything," Darren explained. "Is there a real purpose to this call? Are you looking for someone to blame for your own problems?" The connection went silent for a time before Wade spoke again, his voice sharper and more concentrated. "You believe you comprehend what is happening, but you do not. This was never simply about your wife or the project. You were a means to an end, and disposable component of a bigger strategy. What exactly are you talking about?" Wade said cryptically. "Phoenix is not what you think it is. Consider why Aura was so ready to support your initiative from the start, and why she defended you so fiercely. When the evidence against me surfaced, there are strata you have yet to unearth." Before Darren could ask for explanation. "Join the call." Darren sat motionless, contemplating the new knowledge. Was Wade's insinuations concerning Lenora and Project Phoenix just desperate deception on the part of a fallen rival? Or was there something more to them? He ignored the concept almost instantly. When direct confrontation failed, Wade used old tactics to instill doubt and division in his opponents. Lenora Washington had been nothing but helpful during the situation, defending Darren before the board and supporting his strategic decisions, despite the dangers. However, as Darren drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, Wade's remarks stuck in his memory. In a sophisticated chess match of corporate politics, he had been focusing on the obvious threats. Wade, Valerie, Leonard and Preston, Archer Systems. Had he forgotten something important about his own position on the board? The question would have to wait. Less than 8 hours. Project Phoenix would launch, either signifying the end of his career redemption or the start of an even more arduous conflict. Either way, there was no going back now. The soft launch of Project Phoenix exceeded even Darren's lofty expectations. Industry analysts quickly recognized the platform's novel approach to cybersecurity, with several posting positive preliminary assessments, emphasizing its advantages over conventional systems. Key clients who were given early access reported considerable improvements in threat detection and response times, compared to their present systems. The most satisfying reaction came from Archer Systems, whose hastily produced competing product, based on Wade's stolen and inadequate specifications, was abruptly rendered outdated before it could even be publicly launched. Their stock price fell 12% on the day of Phoenix's introduction, as market analysts altered revenue expectations in response to Meridian's surprise early release. For Darren, professional vindication was profound but not full. Wade's mysterious call the night before the launch sowed seeds of suspicion that refused to be discarded completely. Despite, or perhaps because of, Phoenix's success, he began to question Lenora Washington's enthusiastic, caustic backing. Following the first launch celebration with the development team, Darren withdrew to his office to examine Phoenix's architecture. One more time, he had been so intent on racing Archer to market that he had overlooked the prospect of hidden flaws or other goals within the project. Hours of thorough code review yielded nothing untoward. The platform worked exactly as intended, a credit to his team's skill and commitment. If Phoenix had deeper levels, as Wade suggested, they were not obvious in their technological execution. As Darren was about to depart, Bridget Navarro appeared at his door. Despite the late hour, she was immaculately dressed as usual, but her look showed exceptional concern. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered softly. "May I speak to you privately?" Darren nodded and closed his office door. "What is it, Bridget?" "There is something you should know about Miss Washington's involvement in Project Phoenix." She started carefully. "Something that may explain Mr. Preston's opposition outside his personal enmity." Darren tensed. "Go on." "Miss Washington has been in discussions with Helix Global concerning Meridian's potential takeover. These discussions predated Phoenix by several months, but accelerated dramatically once your project produced promising early results. Helix Global was one of the world's largest technological conglomerates, renowned for smart acquisitions of breakthrough startups. If they were interested in Meridian because of Phoenix, Leonard's unwavering support would make sense. A successful purchase would greatly raise the value of her enormous business stock options. "How do you know that?" Darren asked. Bridget said simply, "I manage Miss Washington's calendar and communications. Very nothing occurs without my knowledge. And you are telling me this because loyalty to this company means more to me than personal gain," she stated firmly. "If Helix acquires Meridian, the company will most certainly undergo significant restructuring. The projects will be consolidated. Positions were deleted. The people who founded this company will be discarded." She had already straightened her posture. Perfect posture. "Including you. Regardless of your contributions." The information confirmed Wade's cryptic warning, but it generated more concerns than answers. Why would Preston reject a purchase that is likely to benefit major stockholders, such as his family? Bridget stated that the Prestons and Helix had a tangled history. Leonard Preston's firm attempted a hostile takeover of Helix 15 years ago, which failed terribly. The Preston family lost substantial wealth and power. Since then, they have been opposed to any Helix alliances or acquisitions. The new facts necessitated careful analysis. If Lenora's support for Phoenix was primarily motivated by positioning Meridian for acquisition, it didn't negate the project's value or Darren's accomplishments. But it did imply that he was potentially being used as a pawn in a larger corporate chess game, one in which his ultimate value could be as disposable as Wade suggested. "Thank you for telling me this, Bridget," Darren said finally. "I appreciate your discretion and loyalty." After she departed, Darren called Miles and asked him to meet at Lorenzo's, despite the late hour. This development necessitated trusted counsel over late-night coffee in a practically deserted eatery. Darren told his pal about Bridget's confession. "It makes sense," Miles said after evaluating the facts. "Lenore has always been strategic about the company's worth. And Phoenix is truly revolutionary. Exactly the type of private technology that would entice Helix. The question is, whether this changes our approach," Darren replied, stirring his coffee absently. "I've assumed that Lenore's support was based on Phoenix's merit and Wade's evident wrongdoing." It undoubtedly was. Miles reasoned. But with the added goal of acquisition posture, one does not rule out the other. If Helix purchases Meridian, what happens to Phoenix and the team? Darren asked. Difficult to say. Helix often retains profitable product lines while consolidating management. They might maintain Phoenix, but reshuffle the leadership. Darren thought about this thoroughly. So I delivered a successful project that increased Meridian's acquisition value, only to be sidelined once the sale closed. Meanwhile, Lenora and other large stockholders benefit greatly from the increasing value. Miles smiled as he remarked, "Welcome to corporate America. The question is, what will you do with this information?" Darren did not answer immediately. His mind was already forming potential strategies. Unlike his encounters with Wade and Valerie, this one required nuance. Lenora Washington was not an antagonist, at least not directly. Her and Darren's interests have been aligned thus far, even if her true reasons were different from what he had believed. "I need leverage," he concluded. "Finally, information that ensures my employment will be secure regardless of business restructuring." "What kind of information?" Miles asked hesitantly. "I am not sure yet," Darren said. "But I know where to begin looking." The ensuing days were a delicate balancing act. In public, Darren focused on Phoenix's successful rollout and the forthcoming full market debut. The development team proceeded to improve features based on early user input, while the marketing department planned a complete promotional campaign. Privately, Darren launched a covert inquiry into Lenora Washington's communications with Helix Global. Using Bridget's assistance providing access to meeting schedules, and Miles's technical expertise obtaining specific digital data, Darren progressively put together a full picture of the acquisition conversations. What emerged was more complicated than he had anticipated. The proposed acquisition was not solely about Phoenix, but the project had clearly piqued Helix's interest. Meridian's established client base, patented technology outside Phoenix, and geographic market presence that supplemented Helix's current portfolio were among the strategic considerations. Most importantly, Darren discovered that Lenora had secured special safeguards for key Meridian employees as part of the preliminary acquisition conditions. These included guaranteed roles for numerous senior executives and project leaders, with Darren specifically naming himself as the Phoenix division's continued management post-acquisition. This revelation triggered a reconsideration. Lenora had not positioned Darren as a disposable asset. She had been working to secure his future role as part of the negotiation strategy. Her support had been more than just self-interested. It had also included security for the team that had given Phoenix its value. The decision now was whether to address Lenora openly about these revelations, or to keep the appearance of ignorance while devising backup measures. After considerable study, Darren chose a middle ground approach, a discourse that would communicate his awareness without accusation. He requested a private meeting with Lenora, claiming to discuss Phoenix's expansion strategy. When they were alone in her office, he skillfully guided the topic to the company's long-term prospects. "Phoenix has outperformed market forecasts," he added. "We are already receiving cooperation inquiries from numerous major technological giants." Lenora examined him closely, including Helix Global. "I understand." "Yes." Darren reported that the VP of Corporate Development was particularly interested in our proprietary encryption algorithms. He discussed potential synergies with their current security system. Landry's stance revealed a subtle tightness. Helix has long been interested in advanced security solutions. It's logical that they would reach out, given Phoenix's successes. "Absolutely," Darren agreed casually, "but I'm curious whether their interest goes beyond Phoenix to Meridian as a whole. Recently, they have pursued an aggressive acquisition strategy." Landau's eyes flickered briefly, confirming his assumptions, before she recovered her composure. "Corporate development teams consider all alternatives. It is their responsibility to identify possible acquisitions, alliances, and competitive threats." "Of course," Darren replied with a small smile. "Just as it is my responsibility to assure Phoenix's sustained success, regardless of any prospective corporate restructuring." The message was plain without being overt. Leonora looked him with increased respect, realizing that he had discovered at least a portion of the transaction. Discussions. "Meridian appreciates your contributions greatly, Darren," she remarked ultimately. "Your employment is secure, regardless of what the company's future holds. I made this obvious to all parties involved." "I appreciate it," Darren answered, "and I hope such assurances are formalized in any early agreements that may exist." Lenore, was a small nod enough to confirm? "Your attention should be on Phoenix's effective deployment. Other issues will resolve themselves correctly." "That has always been my main worry," Darren assured her. "Phoenix is the future of cybersecurity, and ensuring its effective deployment and development is my top concern, regardless of the corporate structure that supported it." Darren's professional position was more secure than it had ever been. Phoenix maintained its strong market penetration, earning industry honors and quickly capturing clients from competitors, including those who abandoned Archer Systems' hastily issued replacement. On the personal front, Valerie and Camden Thornhill continued their aggressive legal effort after failing to get traction with financial claims due to the prenuptial agreement's obvious adultery provisions. They switched to character assassination. Thornhill released selective messages to industry outlets, alleging that Darren had utilized corporate resources for personal vendettas and created a hostile work environment for female employees. Given Darren's proven professional conduct and Meridian's robust human resource policies, these claims had little traction. However, they continued to drain his time and mental resources. Spencer Coleman recommended patience, pointing out that Thornhill's increasingly desperate tactics reflected a weakened position. During a brief meeting, Coleman explained that they have ran out of effective legal strategies. These character attacks are intended to annoy you into making a substantial settlement offer, simply to stop the harassment. I will not be manipulated, Darren said firmly. Not again. Good. Coleman nodded in approval. Because I've uncovered a significant flaw in their strategy. Thornhill's media disclosures are likely to include sensitive discovery materials, which breaches attorneys' ethical norms. I'm filing a bar complaint that may jeopardize his ability to continue representing Mrs. Blackwood. This development, paired with Phoenix's undeniable success, began to transform the power dynamics in the divorce procedures. Valerie, understanding her failing strategic position, began direct communication for the first time since their fight in the house. We need to speak without lawyers. After one more talk to conclude things respectfully, Darren pondered ignoring the message, but eventually decided that a controlled final encounter would speed up the outcome. He agreed to meet in a neutral setting, a private meeting room in Coleman's legal office, where their conversation would be recorded. But Private Valerie appeared impeccably dressed. Darren, as always, noticed minor hints of tension beneath her polished facade. The confident swagger had faded, replaced by a more measured demeanor. Thank you for agreeing to meet. She began speaking as they sat across from one another at the conference table. I believe we both know that the situation has gone beyond what is beneficial to any of us. What did you expect when you collaborated with Way to destroy my career while preparing to divorce me? Darren asked gently. Valerie sighed. I wish to justify my behavior. They were wrong. Completely wrong. However, only our attorneys benefit from this ongoing legal war. Your attorney, Darren, corrected. Mine has been fairly effective at a little expense, simply by adhering to the prenuptial agreement we both signed. That is exactly my point, Valerie remarked, leaning forward. The prenup is explicit. With a documented infidelity. My financial situation is constrained, no matter how long we fight. I'm ready to accept those terms and move forward. Darren examined her closely, looking for the deception that had defined their relationship for so long. Why the sudden reasonableness? Thornhill was preparing a new wave of media allegations when I last heard from him. Valerie admitted that she had terminated Camden's services. His approach produced billable hours and unneeded hostility, rather than outcomes. She hesitated before proceeding. And the truth is that I've had time to consider my options. What I did was unacceptable. Darren, the lies and betrayal, all of it. Spare me the repentance, Darren responded, unimpressed. If you have accepted the prenuptial agreement, please contact Spencer with your new attorney. We can do everything within a few weeks. Valerie nodded and asked quietly. There are also personal considerations to consider. Anger and resentment. Do we just continue that on indefinitely? That's entirely up to you, Darren responded. I'm focused on the future, not the past. Phoenix has outperformed all forecasts. Meridian is poised for major expansion. My professional reputation has never been better. He stood to signify the end of the conversation. Valerie, I have no interest in carrying resentment forward, and I have even less interest in phony reconciliation or artificial closure. Valerie said her parting words as he approached the door. We were incorrect about you. You weren't the working class guy who went above his abilities. You were always as capable as you perceived yourself to be. She gave a sorrowful smile. That's what I immediately admired about you. Before, ambition and hatred obscured everything else. Darren gave her a small nod before leaving. Valerie's defeat provided no satisfaction, but rather a hollow assurance that the lady he had married had never genuinely lived. The person sitting in that conference room, offering tardy respect after all other options had failed, was the genuine Valerie Conway Blackwood, whom he had never truly met. With the divorce processes moving forward on his terms, and Phoenix firmly established as a market leader, Darren's career and personal atonement appeared to be nearing completion. However, Wade Preston's cryptic warning, as well as the revealed acquisition conversations with Helix Global, hinted that he still didn't completely understand the situation. The last pieces would come into place sooner than he expected. Leonard Preston's mounting hatred against Darren and Meridian Technologies, sparked by an unexpected source, has reached a climax in Chapter 6. 3 days following Darren's meeting with Valerie Leonard, Preston made his most aggressive move yet. Having failed to derail Project Phoenix through market manipulation and board pressure, the Preston family patriarch resorted to more direct techniques, including shell corporations and proxy investors. He began a clandestine accumulation of Meridian stock in preparation for a prospective hostile takeover. The plan was well disguised, with acquisitions spread across various firms to circumvent regulatory notification obligations. Without Bridget Navarro's constant monitoring of anomalous trading patterns and habitual caution formed over decades in business environments, the threat may have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Mr. Blackwood, Bridget stated, arrived in Darren's office without an appointment. Her normally calm demeanor was noticeably disturbed. We have a major issue emerging in which someone is systematically accumulating large blocks of Meridian stock through multiple intermediaries. The pattern shows that a hostile action is being planned. Darren quickly saw the ramifications. Preston? Bridget nodded. The strategies are consistent with tactics he has used in previous corporate fights. Miss Washington is presently traveling, returning tomorrow afternoon. She needs to be notified promptly. I will manage it. Darren reassured her and Bridget. Thank you. Your caution might have saved the company. After Bridget left, Darren phoned Miles and Spencer Coleman to form an emergency crisis team. While Miles sought to identify the individual organizations involved in the stock acquisitions, Spencer proposed viable defensive strategies based on Meridian's corporate bylaws and applicable securities legislation. If it is actually Leonard Preston Spencer, his ultimate goal is most likely to remove you and replace you with leadership that is more aligned with family interests. The quickest route would be to acquire enough shares to force a board reorganization, which would effectively end the Helix acquisition conversations, Darren remarked, implying that Leonard's and my interests are perfectly aligned in opposing this. Exactly. Spencer verified that, without Lenora there to officially sanction defensive measures, our immediate options are restricted. By the evening, Miles had verified their concerns. The purchasing patterns were linked to businesses previously used by Preston family investment vehicles. Based on the projected acquisition volume, Leonard Preston most likely held between 12 and 15% of Meridian's outstanding shares. Not enough for control, but enough to cause severe disturbance. He's traveling faster than we expected, Miles noticed. At this rate, he may reach 20% in just a few days. That would give him enough clout to demand board seats and possibly thwart any takeover efforts. We need to slow him down while we devise a counter-approach, Darren explained. What choices do we have without direct authorization? Spencer examined the question carefully. Meridian's bylaws include a provision that allows the interim senior vice president to take temporary protective measures in the CEO's absence. If there is a serious threat to the company's stability, the scope and length are limited. But this clause may buy us some time. Darren imposed a 48-hour freeze on large block stock transfers, a rarely used emergency move intended to prevent market manipulation. This would temporarily impede Preston's acquisition operations until the Nora returned and could deploy more complete defenses. Preston's attorneys promptly protested the move, resulting in frantic discussions that proved their concerns regarding the source of the stock transactions. The legal case would take some time to resolve, but it would achieve Darren's primary goal of postponing further purchases. With this temporary barrier in place, Darren shifted his focus to an attacking approach. If Preston was seeking to stymie the Helix acquisition through stock manipulation, speeding those negotiations could be the most effective countermeasure. Though Darren lacked the power to negotiate directly on Meridian's behalf, he could surely give Helix with updated Phoenix performance numbers to bolster their acquisition interest. Bridget provided cautious back-channel communication, allowing Darren to guarantee that Helix, his corporate development team, received detailed documentation on Phoenix's market performance and planned revenue growth. The message was apparent but not explicit. The purchase window at the existing valuation was soon closing. The technique generated immediate effects by the next morning. Helix had asked for an accelerated meeting with Meridian's management leadership. As soon as Lenore returns, market analysts began to speculate about prospective takeover interest, which pushed Meridian's stock price higher and made Preston's acquisition efforts more expensive. When Leonora arrived the next afternoon, she was fully informed about both the Preston threat and Darren's interim defensive measures. Far from being concerned about his initiative, while her absence, She expressed gratitude for his prompt response. Leonard Preston has tried to undermine my leadership since I became CEO. She made a note during their private encounter. This latest effort is desperate, even by his norms, and he is deliberately targeting Phoenix in my situation, Darren explained. This goes beyond the usual corporate machinations. It has become a personal grudge stemming from his son's circumstances. Landau's expression encouraged the Preston family, which has long combined business and personal affairs. It is their primary weakness. She reviewed the materials that Darren had prepared. You've handled the matter admirably, Darren. The helix acceleration, in particular, performed admirably. Thank you, Darren responded. However, I should note that it required several assumptions regarding your acquisition conversations that were not formally disclosed to me. Liner smiled slightly. Yes, Bridget indicated that you were aware of the negotiations. I expected nothing less from someone with your expertise. She leaned forwards. Let us be direct with each other. Helixes. Meridian has long been of interest, but your initiative has substantially raised their acquisition urgency. If the transaction goes through, I stand to benefit significantly from my stockholding. According to Darren, most significant stockholders agree. Indeed. However, unlike Leonard Preston, I have never believed in abandoning outstanding leaders for short-term gain. The preliminary conditions include explicit provisions that ensure your position and authority over Phoenix following the acquisition. Not as a courtesy, but because it makes good commercial sense. I appreciate your openness, Darren remarked truly. Transparency will be critical in what comes next. Lenora added. Preston will not give up his efforts easily. His pride will not let it. We need a firm response that permanently eliminates this threat, while also accelerating Helix conversations. An intensive planning discussion ensued, lasting until late in the evening. Lenora approved a number of defensive measures, including a shareholder rights plan, also known as a poison pill, that would make further hostile accumulation prohibitively expensive. Simultaneously, she accelerated the Helix discussions, personally calling their CEO to express urgency. These business strategies were important but insufficient. As Darren had discovered from his clashes with Wade and Valerie, simply defensive measures only prolong rather than resolve conflict. A complete approach necessitated identifying and treating the underlying motivations, causing the aggressiveness. Leonard Preston's activities are ultimately about legacy and control, Darren noted as they discussed possible possibilities. His son's professional demise endangers both. This stock play isn't simply about preventing the Helix merger. It is about regaining family prestige by annihilating those guilty for Wade's demise. Lenora, consider this perspective. You may be right. The Preston family has always seen corporate conflict as a zero-sum game. They don't simply want to win. They require their opponents to lose, implying a possible remedy beyond normal corporate defenses. Darren said, if we address the core motivation rather than just the tactical expression, we may find a more permanent solution. What are your suggestions? A direct approach. Darren spoke decisively. I will meet with Leonard Preston personally. The suggestion was unusual yet compelling. Following additional conversation, Lenora agreed, subject to certain conditions, to protect Meridian's interests. The meeting would be unofficial and exploratory, rather than negotiating. With no commitments made without board permission, planning the meeting was surprisingly simple. Despite his aggressive corporate actions, Leonard Preston upheld the social niceties of his class, and a request for a private conversation between gentlemen, properly stated and submitted through authorized channels, was promptly accepted. The next evening, Darren arrived at the Preston family's downtown club, an exclusive venue dating back to the Gilded Age where old money still held its most important conversations out of public view. The wood-paneled private area, with its leather chairs and subdued lighting, exuded the strength and tradition that marked Preston's perspective. Leonard Preston exemplified that tradition. At 72 years old, he was tall and commanding, with the same slick-back hairstyle as his son, albeit his was all silver. His custom suit, and inconspicuous signet ring, completed the appearance of hereditary luxury. Mr. Blackwood acknowledged as Darren entered, but did not rise from his chair or extend his hand. I must admit that I'm curious about this meeting. Mr. Preston, you have shown to be more resilient than anticipated. Darren responded, taking the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I feel that direct talk will handle our current problem more efficiently than ongoing proxy wars. Preston examined him with cold calculation. Mr. Blackwood, my family has been resolving difficulties in this club for 3 generations, but often with people of comparable backgrounds and understanding. The class distinction was intended to emphasize Darren's status as an outsider in Preston's environment. Instead of taking offense, Darren saw it as an opportunity. That is exactly why this conversation is important, he explained quietly. We see the conflict from fundamentally different perspectives. You perceive it as an issue of familial pride and proper social hierarchy. I see it as a direct result of actions and decisions. Preston raised his eyebrow slightly. An intriguing analysis of what acts and decisions support your method of destroying my son's career and reputation. Corporate espionage. Trying to undermine an important company effort for personal advantage. Conspiring with my wife to influence both professional and personal concerns. Darren listed the offenses without emotion. Each represents decisions your kid took with full knowledge of the potential implications. Boys will be boys. Mr. Blackwood. Preston dismissed with a wave of his hand. Corporate competition has always required certain ethical flexibility. The truly terrible offense was your disproportionate response, which was intended not only to defend your job, but also to completely damage Wade's reputation and future possibilities. There was nothing unreasonable about it, Darren argued. Wade and Valerie plotted to completely dismantle my career and marriage. They discussed it openly and repeatedly for months. I just assured that they faced the repercussions of their own strategy. Preston leant forward slightly. Let's put aside motivations and concentrate on current circumstances. Your project was successful. My son's career is in ruins. Your position at Meridian is secure. What possible outcome might this conversation produce other than your personal satisfaction and confronting me? How will you resolve your continued attempts to obtain control of Meridian through stock acquisition? Darren responded directly. Actions that jeopardize not only my position, but also the company's stability and shareholder value, including your own current shares. Preston grinned thinly. So, this is a negotiation. What do you have to offer in exchange for my disengagement understanding? Darren plainly explained why your plan will fail no matter how many shares you acquire, or how much funds you expend. Preston's expression encouraged the young man. I've been completing business acquisitions since before you started community college. My resources and experience are irrelevant in this case. Darren interrupted. Few people risk to confront Leonard Preston because you are fighting the last battle with techniques that do not address contemporary reality. Explain. Preston demanded irritation, as evidenced by his clipped tone. Your goal is to block the Helix acquisition while placing yourself or a designated representative to influence Meridian's leadership. Darren began. You're buying shares to force board representation, intending to incite internal resistance to the Helix deal while also undermining my position as payback for Wade's condition. Preston stayed mute. His absence of denial serves as sufficient confirmation. The technique fails for 3 reasons, Darren explained. First, the Helix talks have expedited greatly as a result of your stock purchases. Both leadership teams have agreed preliminary conditions, with a formal announcement pending final board approval, which has already been gained by a majority vote. Second, Meridian's bylaws include specific anti-takeover provisions that are triggered by the exact acquisition technique you used. These clauses, once activated, effectively nullify the voting power of your newly purchased shares in any leadership decisions made over the next 18 months. Finally, Darren determined that your plan fundamentally misunderstands the nature of Project Phoenix and my relationship with it. The intellectual property and implementation architecture are built in such a way that my continuous leadership is critical to their long-term development, regardless of corporate ownership. This reality is reflected in the acquisition terms, which ensure my position and autonomy following the merger. Preston's countenance changed subtly to support Darren's accurate assessment of both the strategy and its flaws. Preston spoke with grudging respect following a measured silence. You've done your research, Mr. Blackwood. If your claims are correct, what other solutions do you propose? A mutual stand-down, Darren responded. You stop any hostile stock accumulation and board interference attempts. Meridian, in exchange, does not invoke any further anti-takeover restrictions that may have an impact on your existing valid ownership. Meridian's value will rise as a result of either the Helix acquisition or Phoenix's continued growth, making your current shares a great investment. And my son Preston asked the person in charge briefly about his business calculations. Wade's actions have irreversible implications, Darren stated firmly. However, with your cooperation in resolving this disagreement, I would not object to Meridian issuing a statement emphasizing that his departure was due to policy infractions rather than criminal misbehavior. This may aid his eventual rehabilitation in related businesses. Preston regarded the suggestion to be a reasonable framework after carefully evaluating it as a lifetime strategist. Finally, he acknowledged that I would seek certain assurances about how Preston family investments would be treated in any final acquisition conditions. I am confident that such details can be resolved to mutual satisfaction. Darren agreed. Lenora values a clean resolution to this disagreement, as long as essential corporate and shareholder interests are safeguarded. As the conversation came to a close with a tenuous understanding, Leonard Preston extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Blackwood, you would have been a tremendous opponent in my prime. I underestimated you, as did my kid. A common mistake." Darren replied and accepted the handshake. "I've learned to take advantage of the resolution with Leonard Preston, which represented the final piece falling into place. Preston's proxy businesses gradually stopped accumulating stock in the next weeks. The board approved the Helix acquisition, which included negotiated protections for current large investors. Project Phoenix's strong market expansion reinforced Darren's position as its irreplaceable architect and leader. Valerie's divorce process completed when she accepted the prenuptial agreements. The financial settlement was low in comparison to her initial expectations, but reasonable given the stated circumstances. More crucially for Darren, the conclusion occurred without any more media manipulation or character attacks, allowing him to keep his professional reputation intact. The final symbolic climax occurred 6 months after the initial encounter at Wade's beach house. Following the successful completion of the Helix acquisition, Darren was promoted to Executive Vice President of Security Solutions, giving him more influence over numerous product lines beyond Phoenix. His new office was on the executive floor, just near to Wade Preston's former one. On the day he moved into his new workplace, a little parcel arrived with no center information. Inside, there was only one chess piece, a black king with a scribbled note. "Checkmate. Well played, LP." Darren displayed the piece on his credenza as a reminder that in both professional and personal fights, triumph comes from strategic anticipating of the opponent's maneuvers. Wade and Valerie had badly misread this notion, believing that their sophisticated deception gave an insurmountable edge. They never realized that their greatest vulnerability was their complete certainty in his ignorance. As Darren adapted to his new post, the lessons of the previous year impacted his approach to leadership. The betrayal had been terrible, but ultimately illuminating, removing illusions about his marriage and the corporate environment he navigated. What remained was a better awareness of his own strengths and the value of genuine loyalty in professional and personal relationships. Miles Ramirez, who was elevated to Chief Security Officer following the transaction, remained his closest friend and ally. Bridget Navarro continued to serve as the organizational linchpin, her institutional expertise and discrete information collecting proving important during the transfer to Helix ownership. These genuine interactions, built on mutual respect rather than manipulation, served as the cornerstone for Darren's rebuilt life. The final chapter arrived unexpectedly, over a year after the initial incident. While flying to London for a security conference, Darren met Valerie at a hotel bar. She was with an older European businessman who wore the practiced grin, a professional charm that had previously been directed at him. Their gazes met briefly across the room. There were no words exchanged. There is no acknowledgement beyond a moment of recognition. Darren simply nodded slightly and resumed his talk with colleagues, giving her position no more consideration than it merited. Later that evening, as he studied presentation materials in his hotel room, Darren pondered on how much his life had changed since learning of Valerie's betrayal. The anguish and wrath that had first fueled his reaction had matured into something more significant. A profound shift in his perception of both himself and the universe. He maneuvered. Wade and Valerie had thought he was pathetic, easily deceived, and too preoccupied with work to notice their deception. In their arrogance, they had produced the archetype of their own demise, changing a dedicated professional into a strategic enemy who recognized this in both commercial and personal confrontations. Those who predict the last move are more likely to win than those who strike first. Darren closed his laptop and looked out at the London skyline. He was content knowing that he had not only survived their betrayal, but had emerged stronger, smarter, and ultimately successful on all fronts that mattered. The carefully planned replacement had really occurred, not of Darren Blackwood, but of the stupid, trusting person he had previously been. In his place stood someone considerably more formidable, a guy who knew the actual nature of both corporate and personal power, and who would never again be underestimated by those dumb enough to label themselves as his enemies. 18 months after the Helix acquisition, Darren Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 41st floor of Helix Global's New York headquarters. The Manhattan skyline sprawled out in front of him like a chessboard of concrete and glass, an appropriate metaphor for the corporate world, which he had mastered through strategic planning and meticulous execution. At 45, he had accomplished what most CEOs had spent their entire lives working toward. As Executive Vice President for Security Solutions, he supervised a division that generated more than $2 billion in annual revenue. Project Phoenix had developed into the industry's premier Helix Guardian platform, with market penetration exceeding all expectations. His remuneration plan included equity options currently worth 8 figures, with performance triggers guaranteeing significant additional growth. By traditional standards, Darren had won outright. The betrayals that had once threatened to derail both his career and personal life had instead fueled his most major professional accomplishments. Wade Preston had vanished into obscure consultancy gigs, his family connections unable to cover the professional embarrassment of his recorded misbehavior. Valerie had remarried a European investment banker, 20 years her senior, and moved to Geneva, thereby removing herself from the Darren sphere totally. Despite these triumphs, Darren was increasingly restless. The issues that had previously dominated his concentration now felt regular, and the corporate maneuvers that had once required his complete strategic attention were handled almost mechanically. His team was executing using frameworks he had built years before. Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Your time is 2 p.m. A Singaporean team is ready in the conference room." "Thank you, Christine," he said, turning away from the window and the documents for the board presentation tomorrow, finalized and distributed per request. "Mr. Ramirez inquired whether you would be available for dinner this evening to discuss the Taiwan expansion." Darren nodded. "Schedule it for 7 p.m. at Lorenzo's. He will be aware of the location." As he moved through the rest of the day's meetings, Darren maintained the concentrated efficiency that had become his professional characteristic. But, beyond the polished surface, questions remained regarding the ultimate goal of his continuous climb. The vengeance that had once driven his strategic brilliance had long since been achieved. The professional vindication had been completed. What motivated him now? That evening, Miles and I met at Lorenzo's, an Italian bistro where we had become regulars. Darren found himself facing these questions more intimately than he had anticipated. "You appear distracted," Miles noticed after they had completed the essential paperwork for the Taiwan security operations expansion. "Is this unusual for you?" Darren smiled slightly. "I'm just considering next steps. Taiwan is rock solid. The executive team unanimously supports the expansion. The board's approval tomorrow is a formality." Miles examined his acquaintance closely. "But that's not what you're thinking, is it?" "No," Darren confessed. "I'm thinking more generally about direction, purpose." Miles nodded, not surprised. "The natural reflection that occurs after fulfilling all strategic objectives. What exactly does victory entail when there are no more imminent wars to fight? What about that?" Darren nodded, grateful for his friend's keen onus. The Phoenix Project, renamed Guardian, aimed to create something revolutionary that went beyond quarterly targets or market position. The past year has been about optimization more than invention. "So you're bored," Miles concluded with a small smile. "The most perilous condition for an intellect like yours." "Not bored," Darren said, wondering if this is the endpoint or a plateau before something more substantial. "Like, what?" "That is something I haven't completely defined yet." When Darren weighed in, he said, "Valerie betrayed me. The route forward was obvious: survive, expose, reclaim, but advance." Each phase had specified goals and criteria. Now he gestured vaguely. "Success feels hollow." Miles thought about this carefully. "You know, I've been showing you photos of Valerie's automobile and Preston's beach house all along this tour. You've been focusing on external affirmation and proving yourself to foes who have undervalued you. Perhaps the next step isn't to prove anything to anyone else. Perhaps it is about defining success only on your own terms." The observation struck Darren more profoundly than he had anticipated. His entire career path, from his working-class roots to his rise at Meridian and now Helix, has been driven by an underlying desire to display his ability to others. His reaction to Wade and Valerie's treachery had eventually been to prove them wrong in their opinion of him as pitiful and manipulative. "My own terms," Darren repeated, contemplatively. "What would that actually look like?" "That's a question only you can answer," Miles said. "But I believe it entails creating something that will transcend quarterly reports or stock prices, something with ramifications beyond corporate bounds." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Miles's point of view lingered in Darren's mind long after dinner. As he returned to his penthouse apartment, a modern, minimalist space he had purchased following the divorce, he found himself considering a fundamental reassessment of his direction. The following morning, Darren gave his board presentation with remarkable clarity. The Taiwan expansion was unanimously approved, with numerous board members praising the strategic foresight shown in the implementation timeframe. Throughout the discussion, however, Darren's attention remained focused on the more personal strategic question that had arisen from his conversation with Miles. Following the board meeting, an unexpected encounter provided further insight into this evolving reassessment. As Darren left the executive floor, he met Leonora Washington, who had joined Helix's board following the acquisition. She met Darren cordially after her brief stint as an integration consultant. Excellent presentation. The board is continually impressed by your division's performance. Thank you, Leonora, he responded. She admitted that, while the team gets the majority of the credit for execution, the strategic architecture is indisputably yours. She glanced at her watch. Have you got a few minutes? There is something I'd like to discuss. They walked to a tiny executive lounge adjacent to the boardroom to provide privacy for their conversation. I've been watching your work closely. Leonora began as they were seated. Not just the financial indicators, which are excellent, but also the overall trajectory. You are positioning Guardian for applications beyond typical corporate security. Darren nodded. Based on her observations, the basic design has potential applications in critical infrastructure protection, healthcare, data security, and a variety of other industries with major social impact. Exactly. Leonora expressed her approval. That is why I'd like to speak with you about a personal project I've been working on since transitioning from operational leadership. She added that she founded a foundation to provide cybersecurity measures for nonprofit organizations, healthcare practitioners in underprivileged communities, and national institutions with inadequate technological resources. These organizations were increasingly targeted by sophisticated attacks, but lacked the capacity to install enterprise-level security solutions. Leonora emphasized the importance of technical leadership for the foundation, someone who understands both security architecture and strategic implementation in resource-constrained settings. Someone with a vision beyond traditional corporate uses. The inference was clear, while Leonora made no explicit offer. She was indicating a possible course that resonated with Darren's evolving issues about purpose and impact. It's an intriguing thought. Darren acknowledged. The vulnerability gap between well-funded enterprises and critical service providers is growing rapidly. Indeed, Leonora agreed. And closing that gap will take more than traditional business techniques. It requires creativity that is not restricted by quarterly reporting deadlines or shareholder expectations. As their chat came to an end, Leonora left him with one final thought. When I first supported Project Phoenix at Meridian, the first noticed something about your approach that went beyond normal project management or technical leadership. You were creating something that you believed was inherently important, rather than merely something to promote your career or produce income. This was the original vision. Darren confirmed. Consider whether that goal has been fully achieved inside the current business structure, as Leonora indicated, or if it may require a different framework to reach its full potential. Darren had sensed the talk with Leonora Crystal, but had not fully voiced it. His restlessness was not solely motivated by a desire to take on new tasks inside the established business hierarchy. It was about evaluating if that hierarchy was the best fit for his expanding vision of what Guardian could become. Over the next few weeks, Darren began looking into options. He carried out his executive tasks with unwavering effectiveness, while spending evenings and weekends exploring models for technology deployment in public sector contexts. Hospitals are one example of where Guardian security architecture could be used to secure critical infrastructure. Municipal systems. Educational networks provided a path to impact that exceeded traditional corporate achievement. Metrics. During the research phase, Spencer Coleman, the attorney who handled Darren's divorce, sent an unexpected communication, a standard financial notification addressing the final resolution of a property division problem, which included a brief personal remark. I thought the enclosed article might be of interest to you. The Prestons appear to be experiencing issues that go beyond your own. The linked news item described major financial and legal issues with Preston Holdings, the family's primary investment vehicle. Leonard Preston resigned as chairman after a string of disastrous enterprises and regulatory probes. The corporation that previously symbolized old money, power, and influence was now liquidating assets to pay financial obligations. Darren read the piece with detached interest, not satisfaction. The decline of the Preston family marked neither victory nor vindication for him. Now it is simply the natural result of strategic errors and shifting market circumstances. The dynasty that had once appeared untouchable has been exposed to the same factors that affect any business operation. More significant than the Preston scenario was the impact on Darren's outlook. He recognized he had no lingering hatred or desire for further retaliation. The chess game that had previously absorbed his strategic focus was long over. The win was secure, but it became increasingly irrelevant to his current concerns. This emotional distance from prior disputes allowed for more forward-thinking evaluation. Darren began developing a full examination of Leonora's proposal, a prospective shift from corporate leadership to guiding technological innovation for social benefit. The examination evaluated professional, financial, and personal elements with the same strategic rigor he used to make commercial decisions. Professionally, Such a transition would entail shifting his existing path, which would most likely culminate in a CEO post within 5 years. For leadership in a field where success and appreciation are measured differently, financially, he would need to make major adjustments to compensate for the difference in expectations. But his existing resources were more than adequate for lifetime security. Personally, the most exciting aspect was the possibility to define success solely on his own terms, rather than through external validation or competitive positioning. Darren's compartmentalization remained consistent throughout the research. His daily leadership of the Security Solutions Division remained effective. Quarterly results exceeded expectations. According to colleagues and the management team, the Taiwan expansion is proceeding as planned. He remained the focused strategic leader, whose logical decision-making had become famous inside the firm. Only Miles Ramirez noticed the minor signs of Darren's internal recalibration. His growing interest in applications beyond corporate clients, as well as his concerns regarding security implementation in resource-constrained situations. He makes occasional references to impact measures, other than revenue and market share. You're actually contemplating the Norris Foundation, right? Miles inquired during one of their monthly dinner sessions at Lorenzo's. Darren smiled slightly. Am I only that open to someone I've known for 20 years? Miles reassured him. For everyone else, you are still the quintessential corporate professional, but I have seen a shift in your emphasis. You're mapping out departure strategies and transition situations. This is simply a preliminary evaluation. Darren highlighted that a comprehensive review of possibilities is simply excellent practice, regardless of the final conclusion. Of course, Miles concurred with knowing delight. Similarly, your extensive research into foundation governance systems and nonprofit leadership models is largely theoretical. Darren acknowledged the observation with a small nod. The corporate structure has served its purpose well. I've met the goals I set after the Meridian crisis. The question now is whether that framework is still the best vehicle for what I hope to do next. So, what precisely is that? Miles asked. Beyond the professional terminology and strategic frameworks, what do you intend to establish in the following phase? The inquiry pierced Darren's carefully maintained analytical distance, necessitating a more personal response than he usually provided. After a thoughtful pause, he responded with uncharacteristic directness. Protection for people who do not have the capacity or resources to defend themselves. He stated simply that the fundamental guardian architecture may be modified to secure vital systems for organizations that cannot afford corporate solutions, hospitals that serve vulnerable populations, municipal infrastructure for economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, educational institutions with inadequate technological resources, represent the opposite of the current family approach to power and influence. Miles observed. Perhaps. Darren conceded, but I'm not approaching this as a response to that experience. It's more about identifying where technology can have the greatest impact. I believe you, Miles responded truly. And, for what it's worth, I believe you'd excel in that capacity. The same strategic acumen that made you formidable in corporate fights can be revolutionary when used to protect people who cannot defend themselves. Darren nodded, grateful for his friend's support. There is one more component to examine before making a decision. What is that? You. Darren replied simply. Any transition I make will also have an impact on your position. Our professional paths have been aligned since Meridian. The first want to make a change that undermines all we've accomplished together. Miles laughed quietly. I wonder when you'll get to that. Every variable is always being analyzed. He leaned forward. Look, I followed you from Meridian to Helix because I trust your vision and leadership. If that vision extends beyond corporate bounds, why should my devotion be confined by organizational charts? You are recommending that you explore a similar change. I propose that meaningful partnerships transcend specific job forms. Miles clarified that if you believe this foundation is the greatest vehicle for your next chapter, we can consider what role might be appropriate for me within that framework, or I may remain a Helix as your insider access to corporate resources. The topic switched to practical matters, but Darren felt a slight weight lift. The strategic analysis would continue, but with the assurance that his most important professional relationship was not dependent on his current company position. 2 weeks later, Darren requested a private meeting with Jeffrey Hammond, Helix Global's CEO. The timing was planned. Following the strong quarterly profits report and positive initial results from the Taiwan expansion, he would approach this conversation with confidence, rather than necessity. Hammond welcomed him into his office with the nonchalant assurance of someone used to wielding considerable influence. At 62, he had led Helix through multiple market evolutions, sustaining growth while competitors faltered. His admiration for Darren was obvious, but it was calculated, like the cautious regard one strategic mind gives another. Your division's performance has continued to impress the board. Hammond began once they were situated in a comfortable spot away from his desk. The Guardian platform puts us years ahead of our competition in important security areas. Thank you, Darren replied. The team has performed admirably on the underlying architecture we created. Hammond examined him with the astuteness that had made him a formidable CEO. But you are not here to discuss quarterly results. You're thinking about something more substantive. Yes. Darren agreed, liking the forthright approach. I'm looking into a potential transition that would enable Guardian's core technology to address security problems beyond our regular corporate client base. He defined the concept broadly. Adapting the security architecture for use in resource-constrained domains, such as public health, education, and municipal infrastructure. These sectors faced more complex threats, but lacked the resources to provide enterprise-level defense. Hammond praised Lenora Washington's foundation, exhibiting his unique understanding of organizational dynamics. She mentioned it during our last board meal. I was wondering whether she would contact you about technical leadership. She proposed ideas rather than making precise offers. Darren clarified, but the concept is consistent with my view of where Guardian may have the most significant influence beyond present applications. Hammond pondered this carefully. You know that this would be a considerable departure from your existing path. Most CEOs in your position are focused on CEO succession rather than nonprofit leadership. I do, Darren admitted. This is not a decision I am taking lightly. No, you would not. Hammond agreed with a small smile. Because methodical, strategic review is your strong suit. I'm assuming you've already identified viable transitions. Scenarios that would minimize disturbance to the Security Solutions division, while maximizing long-term benefit for both helixes. In this new orientation, there are various alternatives. Darren agreed, impressed but unsurprised by Hammond's accurate appraisal. He highlighted the frameworks he had created for a phased transition that would ensure leadership continuity for Guardian's company implementations, while laying the groundwork for broader applications. Hammond listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions to demonstrate his understanding of both the technical and organizational consequences. When Darren finished his presentation, Hammond paused for a time before responding. Most CEOs who decide to quit craft carefully produce narratives about new challenges or personal objectives that conceal their true motivations, he found. Your approach is refreshingly honest. You've identified an application for Guardian that you believe is more important than quarterly growth or market position. Yes, Darren confirmed simply. And you create a transition framework that protects Helix's interests while allowing for this new course. Hammond nodded gratefully. It's the same strategic thoroughness you've brought to each problem since joining us through the Meridian acquisition. He got up and went to the window, staring out at the city skyline before returning to Darren. I won't pretend not to be disappointed that we may lose an executive of your caliber from our leadership team, but I admire both your reasoning and your approach to transition management. Thank you, Darren responded. Of course, the board will need to go over the details, Hammond added. But you have my preliminary approval for the framework you've proposed. Work with human resources to create the formal transfer plan, and we'll work carefully within the time limit you've specified. As Darren exited Hammond's office, he felt an unanticipated lightness. The conversation had unfolded just as a strategic assessment had predicted. However, the actuality of making this transformation brought clarity that analysis alone could not deliver. Over the next few months, the road forward became more clear. Darren made the shift with customary precision. He collaborated closely with Hammond to choose and train his successor as Executive VP of Security Solutions, ultimately choosing Julia Kwan, his most promising division head, who combined technical expertise and strategic vision. The knowledge transfer was thorough and comprehensive, assuring Guardian's corporate implementation continuity. While Darren began laying the groundwork for its broader use, Lenora Washington formalized her offer to have Darren oversee the technological branch of her foundation, which is now officially known as Signal Shield. The role would allow him to modify Guardian's architecture to secure vulnerable infrastructure while keeping a strong relationship to Helix to assure continuing technological alignment. The salary was substantial by nonprofit standards, but low when compared to his corporate package, a factor rendered irrelevant by his current financial security. True to his word, Miles Ramirez created a hybrid role that preserved his status at Helix while establishing formal collaboration channels with Signal Shield. This agreement gave the foundation with access to enterprise-level resources, while maintaining Miles's career path. 6 months after his conversation with Hammond, Darren officially began his new role. The corporate announcement emphasized the strategic relationship between Helix and Signal Shield, framing the move as an expansion of Guardian's reach rather than Darren's exit from the corporate structure. Industry publications mentioned the unexpected career change, but characterized it as visionary rather than withdrawing. As Darren settled into his new office at Sentinel Shield, an executive at the top of his career chose impact over future corporate rise. More basic than his prior accommodations, but with equally stunning views of the city, he found himself ruminating on the path that had brought him here. The treachery that had previously threatened to destroy his professional and personal life had instead triggered a metamorphosis much beyond anything he could have imagined in those early dark days of discovery. Wade and Valerie regarded him as pitiful and manipulative, ignorant that their betrayal would unleash powers that would not only assure their demise, but also drive Darren to new heights. Neither of them had contemplated the possibility, but the end result went beyond mere vengeance or vindication. It resulted in a fundamental shift in Darren's definition of success and purpose, from external validation to self-determined influence. His phone vibrated with a text from Miles's office setup. "First day is going nicely." Darren grinned slightly as he responded. "A new chess game, with different rules and a better goal." The reply arrived immediately. "Some opponents are worth defeating. Aren't people looking forward to the campaign?" Darren placed down his phone and looked at the metropolitan skyline. The obstacles ahead would be significant. Adapting enterprise security architecture to resource-constrained contexts. Navigating the complicated convergence between technology and social impact. Building new teams with objectives other than corporate advancement. But for the first time since the night he discovered Valerie's car at Wade's beach house, Darren felt a feeling of purpose that went beyond reaction and vindication. He was no longer struggling against betrayal. He was working toward protection, not proving others incorrect about him, but showing himself correct about what was most important. Sentinel Shield's offices were located on 3 floors of a restored factory building in Brooklyn, a deliberate departure from the sparkling Manhattan skyscrapers that housed Helix Global and other business heavyweights. The space embodied Lenora Washington's concept for the foundation: innovative yet accessible, professional without ostentation, technologically advanced but being human scale. Darren's first 6 months as technical director were a study in contrast to his previous post, where Helix provided nearly unlimited resources, subject to stringent quarterly performance targets. Sentinel Shield operated with less funds, but more flexibility in terms of timeliness and applications. Corporate objectives were obvious and quantifiable, such as market share, revenue growth, and profitability, while foundation performance criteria were more subtle: implementation reach, vulnerability reduction, incident prevention in low-resource contexts. The most noticeable difference was in the team composition. His Helix section was filled by highly credentialed specialists from prestigious institutions and renowned technological organizations, all of whom were motivated by opportunities for growth and salary. Sentinel Shield attracted a more varied group: brilliant security architects who were dissatisfied with corporate priorities, idealistic young programmers who care about social impact, experienced systems engineers looking for practical applications for their skills. Integrating these diverse objectives and working methods into a unified team confronted Darren with leadership problems beyond anything he had encountered in corporate settings. The strategic brilliance that had made him so powerful at Meridian and Helix needed to be adapted to this new setting: less hierarchical and more collaborative. The emphasis was on inspiration rather than authority. "You played chess," Lenore saw during one of their weekly strategy sessions, "moving pieces with specific purposes, according to the set rules. This is more akin to gardening, in that you create conditions for growth without having complete control over the process." Darren recognized the accuracy of her assessment. "The shift has been instructive, but you are adapting faster than I expected." Lenora agreed, stating that the team appreciates your strategic clarity as well as your willingness to embrace their ideas. "This is an interesting combo. Understanding the specific context is essential for effective leadership." Darren responded. What worked at Helix would not be applicable here. This versatility extended to his whole approach to the Sentinel Shield mission. The initial notion was pretty simple: alter Guardian security architecture for use in resource-constrained situations such as public hospitals, schools, and municipal systems. However, when Darren engaged himself in the actual demands of these institutions, he realized that technology solutions were insufficient. The most complex security architecture was only as successful as the human mechanisms that powered it. Many vulnerable firms lacked not only financial resources for enterprise security, but also the technical competence required to maintain and respond to security systems. Implementation without ongoing support and training will result in illusory security rather than actual protection. This revelation inspired Darren to broaden his initial concept. creating what he called the SHIELD ecosystem, a holistic strategy that comprised technology installation, personnel training, ongoing support structures, and community security networks. Organizations obtaining Sentinel SHIELD protection would join a collaborative system, exchanging threat intelligence and response techniques, while receiving ongoing technical support. The strategy required substantially more resources than anticipated, posing Darren's first big strategic challenge in his new position. 6 months into implementation, with pilot programs yielding encouraging results but funding constraints restricting expansion, he requested a private meeting with Lenora to discuss sustainable scaling. He highlighted that the current paradigm works, providing specific performance numbers from the initial hospital and school implementations. However, it requires significant resources from each organization. At current financing levels, it will reach around 60 institutions every year, representing a fraction of the critical infrastructure that need protection. Lenora analyzed the projection models. What alternatives have you considered? 3 paths. Darren responded, presenting the strategic frameworks he'd created. First, focus resources on important infrastructure such as hospitals and emergency services, while accepting a limited role in education and municipal systems. Second, develop a tiered deployment strategy that provides total security for the most vulnerable, while delivering partial solutions to larger businesses. Or third, he paused briefly before continuing. Create a business partnership program that uses private sector resources to broaden our reach, while adhering to our key mission principles. Lenora raised her eyebrow at the third choice. You propose incorporating corporate organizations into a foundation specifically designed to operate independently of profit-driven motivations. Strategic alliances, not corporate control. Darren clarified. Companies with considerable security resources could adopt vulnerable organizations in their communities, offering financial and technical assistance, while Sentinel SHIELD handles implementation, oversight, and quality assurance. He described the framework in full. A properly planned program that would allow for greater reach while defining clear limits between corporate contributions and foundation independence. The model outlined strong ethical criteria, transparency requirements, and implementation standards that member organizations would have to achieve. Lenora admitted that it is a fine balance after reviewing the plan. Corporate resources exist without corporate control, but if anyone can create a system that preserves that distinction, it's you. She grinned slightly. Your entire career has been about figuring out how to operate effectively inside complex power structures while pursuing your own strategic goals. Lenora probably didn't understand how astute her assessment was. Darren's interactions with Wade Preston and subsequent corporate chess games had enhanced his ability to negotiate systems with competing interests and agendas. The talents that had allowed him to survive and prevail in past conflicts were now being repurposed for collaborative defense, rather than competitive advantage. With Leonard's agreement, Darren launched the Corporate Partnership Program, beginning with focused outreach to firms with established corporate social responsibility initiatives and strong technology resources. The response far beyond his hopeful expectations, with major corporations keen to associate their brands with tangible community protection rather than abstract philanthropic contributions. Helix Global, as expected, was among the first to commit significant resources, with Jeffrey Hammond personally approving an extended cooperation that involved both financial and technical staff exchanges. More surprising was the participation of some corporations that had hitherto concentrated only on profit maximization. Their leadership understands the strategic benefits of displaying social responsibility in an increasingly values-driven industry. 9 months into his time at Signal Shield, Darren got an invitation of both emotional and professional significance. Leonard Preston requested a meeting in his Manhattan house. After the first struggles, the Preston family's financial condition had stabilized. However, their influence remained limited in comparison to their past dominance. Leonard had formally resigned from active corporate leadership, choosing his daughter Catherine to oversee the family's residual assets. Darren welcomed the invitation with controlled curiosity. His interactions with Leonard after their altercation in the downtown club had been limited. Occasional acknowledgments. There were industry gatherings, but no substantive communication. What is the objective of this gathering now? Years after the corporate battle had been resolved, Leonard's occupants inhabited the top floor of a classic Upper East Side building. The decor, which reflects ancient money, features athletics, antique furniture, oil paintings of stern ancestors, and leather-bound volumes on mahogany shelves. At 75, Leonard appeared physically frail but cognitively strong. His observations remained keen as he welcomed Darren. Your foundation work has gotten a lot of attention, Leonard said when they sat down in his study and skipped the short conversation. This is quite a deviation from your expected corporate trajectory. Different applications of the same fundamental principles. Darren responded neutrally. Indeed, Leonard agreed on the strategic use of technology resources to achieve specified objectives. Though the beneficiaries differed significantly from normal business deployments, he carefully examined Darren. What prompted this particular direction, if I may inquire? It seems like an unexpected option for someone with your skills and market position. The question appeared genuinely curious rather than hostile, encouraging Darren to react with equal seriousness. Recognizing that security technology is increasingly concentrated in entities with significant resources, while vulnerabilities are exploited largely in companies without such safeguards, the mismatch produces systemic danger that extends beyond particular institutions. Leonard nodded, seemingly content with the answer. Consider a pragmatic approach to resource limits in your corporate partnership program. Yes, Darren has confirmed. I'm becoming increasingly interested about the purpose of these queries. Leverage exists in every system. The trick is to identify and direct it towards specific goals, rather than letting it to function unchecked. Leonard smiled slightly, indicating a mindset that we might share despite our various applications. He stood up and went to his desk, fetching a folder, which he handed to Darren. The Preston Foundation has extended an offer to Signal Shield to become a key financing partner, with an emphasis on rural healthcare infrastructure protection. Darren opened the folder and examined the detailed proposal with measured amazement. The investment was strong enough to fund thorough implementation for more than 30 rural hospitals that serve economically disadvantaged communities. The conditions were clear, with no control provisions, as is typical of Preston family investments. This is unexpected. Darren acknowledged closing the folder. Perhaps, Leonard conceded, but not exactly rational. The Preston family has always invested in healthcare facilities, particularly in rural areas where manufacturing enterprises were once located. This provides a continuance of that commitment, updated to reflect contemporary technical realities. The explanation seemed reasonable, but incomplete. Both men understood the symbolic significance of their investment, in addition to its practical value. Leonard Preston donated significant funds to a nonprofit established by the man who had outmaneuvered his son and contributed to their family's declining corporate status. Can I inquire about the timing? Darren inquired carefully. Leonard's countenance changed slightly, showing a more intimate depth beneath the businesslike facade. Age brings perspective. Mr. Blackwood's family legacy becomes increasingly meaningful as one's own life gets shorter. He paused before proceeding more directly. Wade's actions, and my subsequent attempts to shield him from the repercussions, were misplaced. Preston's name should be connected with real accomplishments, rather than corporate scheming or retaliation. He motioned toward the folder. Catherine, my daughter, will oversee our family's involvement moving forward. She prioritizes building rather than dominating. Protection above acquiring, and equivalence. Stages, differently from her brother or myself. The discussion concluded with a formal agreement to move forward with the legal examination of the partnership agreements. As Darren prepares to go, Leonard made a final comment. You could have absolutely wrecked Wade. You are aware that the evidence you gathered would have supported criminal charges in addition to the business misbehavior that led to his termination from Meridian. However, you restricted your response to professional penalties rather than personal ruin. It wasn't necessary, Darren said simply. Professional accountability was enough. Leonard nodded slowly. Restraint in victory is a rare quality. He extended his hand. I am excited for our foundation's collaboration. As Darren left the Preston home, he mused on the unexpected situation. The proposed alliance provided considerable practical benefits to the Single Shield's objective, including shielding critical healthcare facilities that serve thousands of patients. Aside from the practical impact, it signified a resolution to the Preston chapter that went beyond simple victory or vindication. Former antagonists become partners working together to achieve a similar goal. The Preston Foundation partnership has propelled Sentinel Shield's growth beyond initial expectations. By the end of Darren's first year as technical director, the protective ecosystem had been implemented in over 100 vulnerable organizations across the country, resulting in documented security enhancements that prevented numerous potentially devastating intrusions. Professional acclaim followed, with industry journals praising Sentinel Shield's novel approach to security democratization. Darren was increasingly invited to talk at conferences and policy forums about the rising security gap between resource-rich and resource-constrained enterprises. Despite this external confirmation, his most significant contribution remains the tangible protection now provided to institutions serving vulnerable populations. When a concerted ransomware attack targeted healthcare facilities across the country, All 17 hospitals in the Shield ecosystem maintained operational continuity, but hundreds of unprotected institutions had system failures that jeopardized patient safety. This visible consequence strengthened Darren's belief that his professional redirection had been the correct one. The strategic qualities that had propelled his company to success were now serving a purpose greater than quarterly reports or market positioning, developing solutions to defend people most exposed to increasingly sophisticated electronic threats. 1 year after joining Signal Shield, Darren had a small gathering at his flat to commemorate the event. The guest list was purposely limited. Miles Ramirez, Lenora Washington, Bridget Navarro, who had semi-retired but continued to advise Lenora, and Julia Kwan, who had successfully transitioned into Darren's former position at Helix, sat down to dine on his patio, overlooking the city skyline. The talk naturally shifted to observations on the Foundation's first year and the odd career paths that led to their current positions. "I remember how the board reacted when you announced your decision to depart," Julian observed, glancing at Darren. "Half of them assumed you were experiencing a midlife crisis. The other half suspected you were forming a covert subsidiary to eventually reintegrate into Helix. And now?" Darren inquired with modest curiosity. "They now claim that Helix has formed a collaboration with Synopsys to demonstrate our stakeholder-centric corporate approach." Julia responded to every investor presentation with an amused smile. "Success typically validates unusual decisions. Success measured by what metric?" Lenora posed the seemingly casual inquiries, which had deeper implications. "Partnerships between corporations. Implementation numbers, avoided incidents. All valid measurements," Darren admitted, but ultimately secondary to the main goal: reducing the security gap between those with and those without resources by implementing protection. Equilibrium, rather than concentration. Miles raised his glass in a casual toast to safety and equilibrium. A more worthy goal than quarterly growth targets. As the evening progressed, Darren found himself viewing his small group of trusted colleagues with a sense of gratitude that went beyond professional affiliation. These were the folks who had remained consistent during his most critical transitions, from ambitious corporate director to revenge-focused strategist to purpose-driven security architect. Later, after the visitors had left, Darren stood alone on his terrace. With the metropolis sprawled out in front of him, the same structures that had formerly symbolized his corporate warfare now seemed as an integrated ecosystem hospital, servicing patients regardless of resource, and as schools educating future generations. Millions of people rely on municipal systems to work every day. The shift in vision reflected his own internal maturation, which had previously focused on rivalry and hierarchy. He now saw interdependence and common vulnerabilities. The strategic acumen that had enabled his business ascent and subsequent revenge had evolved into something more constructive, developing systems that protected rather than dominated. As he turned to walk in, his phone vibrated with a notification. The Shield ecosystem had just blocked another attempted breach at a rural hospital, and the Preston Foundation network protection was working just as intended, unseen to patients and healthcare providers who continue to do their vital work. Darren grinned slightly, feeling a gratification greater than any corporate win could bring. This was the actual replacement, not of his position or prestige, but of his whole purpose. From professional survival to strategic revenge, to something more lasting, something that will outlast any one career path or personal vindication. Building shields rather than guns. Creating protection instead of vulnerability. Using strategic brilliance to protect rather than defeat the most important win of all. 3 years into Darren's tenure at Seminole Shield, the Foundation's influence had exceeded initial expectations. The protective ecosystem now includes more than 400 vulnerable institutions across the country, ranging from rural hospitals to metropolitan school districts to municipal infrastructure systems that serve economically disadvantaged populations. More crucially, the paradigm had been embraced globally, with parallel implementations underway in Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America. What began as an adaptation of Guardian security architecture for non-corporate environments has grown into a full framework for security democratization, a methodical approach to provide safety to businesses, regardless of financial resources or technical capabilities. The Shield ecosystem incorporated technological installation, ongoing support structures, training programs, and coordinated threat response networks into a comprehensive security strategy. The corporate partnership program had also grown, with over 60 large corporations now actively involved in safeguards. Sponsorship. The Preston Foundation remained one of the most prominent supporters, with Catherine Preston personally managing their rural healthcare security efforts. The program has progressed from simple cash help to a structured engagement approach, in which corporate security resources directly assisted vulnerable groups, while adhering to single shields, ethical guidelines, and implementation standards. Darren's professional reputation had changed correspondingly. He was once known for his corporate strategy brilliance and rapid rise at Meridian and Helix, but he is now acknowledged as a pioneer in security equity, addressing the rising protection gap between resource-rich and resource-constrained enterprises. Industry media that have previously followed his executive career trajectory now examine his impact on security policy and infrastructure protection approaches. The personal transformation had been as significant. His cool, calculated reaction to Wade and Valerie's betrayal had grown into something more balanced. Strategic brilliance tempered with human sensitivity. Systematic analysis focused on protection rather than advantage. This change was visible in his leadership style at Signal Shield, where the corporate Darren was respected, but also feared for his brutal effectiveness. Foundation colleagues characterized him as tough but inspiring, maintaining high standards while transmitting a sense of purpose that went beyond simply professional success. During their quarterly strategy review, Lenora commented, "You've created something truly transformative, not only in security implementation, but also in the way protection is envisaged. The SHIELD model is increasingly being used to compare various techniques." Darren responded, "The team deserves primary credit, deflecting personal accolades. Their dedication to ongoing improvement has propelled our progress beyond the initial frameworks." "True," Lenore conceded, "but frames do matter. Your strategy architecture laid the groundwork for their innovations." She watched him with the same perceptiveness that had made her such a successful CEO. "You appear more balanced than when you initially joined us. More aligned with a higher purpose than just achievement." Darren carefully evaluated this assessment. The business environment promotes various types of strategic thinking, most notably competitive positioning and resource dominance. These talents are applicable outside of business environments, but they must be refocused on alternative goals, such as protection rather than competitiveness. Lenora summed with satisfaction. The recalibration went beyond professional applications. To Darren, the betrayal that had once defined his strategic focus had faded in importance, becoming only one chapter in a larger story, rather than its defining feature. Evidence of this evolution appeared unexpectedly at a cybersecurity conference in London, where Darren was giving a keynote speech on protection equality. During the subsequent reception, a familiar voice interrupted his talk with European security officers. "Darren Blackwood, your foundation work has earned you quite a reputation across the pond." Darren turned to face Wade Preston for the first time in nearly 4 years. Wade had obviously aged, his once perfectly maintained visage revealing indications of strain. While he retained the false confidence that defines the corporate persona, Darren responded quietly, "I was unaware that you were attending this seminar, a late addition to the speaker list." Wade responded with forceful casualness. "Mid-market enterprises provide consulting services for corporate security integration. Not nearly the headliner, but a good return after career changes." The awkward reference to his career demise sat between them for a time before Wade continued. "Your sister Catherine greatly recommends your foundation collaboration. Given our past, this was a surprising turn of events." "Your father started the partnership," Darren observed. "Catherine has been a fantastic implementation partner, particularly for rural healthcare protection." Wade nodded, causing an awkward wait before speaking again, his tone becoming less professional. "I followed your efforts. You're familiar with the SHIELD ecosystem. Impressive architecture, true innovation in distributed security protocols." The professional recognition, which was shockingly heartfelt, mirrored Wade's previous status as an engineer. Ambition and entitlement had distorted his approach. Darren had a short sight of his coworker. Wade might have been in a different situation. "Despite personal problems, I value technical superiority." "Thank you," Darren responded simply. "I was mistaken." Wade went on, evidently struggling with the admission, "which was not only about you. Though that evaluation was catastrophically erroneous. It was about security architecture. Protection concentration leads to systemic weaknesses, independent of individual implementation quality." It was perhaps the closest Wade Preston would ever go to a sincere apology, admitting his basic misjudgment of both Darren's ability and security concepts themselves. The admission was motivated by professional recognition, not remorse. Wade the engineer finally saw what Wade, the ambitious executive, had failed to see. Darren inquired about your present consulting work, purposefully moving the subject away from personal history. "Is it concerned with protection standards in situations with changeable resources?" Wade appeared astonished by the implied professional civility in the inquiry. "Mid-market enterprises are attempting, albeit with limited client receptivity, to provide enterprise-level security at a fraction of the cost and without implementation complexity. We've developed various frameworks that could be useful. Darren offered, surprising himself with his real involvement. Overture Miles Ramirez could offer relevant protocols, if you are interested. No foundation affiliation is necessary for implementation. The offer of professional respect without personal reconciliation appeared to temporarily disarm Wade's carefully maintained facade. I would enjoy it, he said with uncommon modesty. Miles has always understood implementation issues better than most security theorists. As their brief contact ended, and Wade moved on to other topics, Darren saw something significant in his own answer. He had approached Wade not as the man who had deceived him professionally and personally, but rather as another security specialist working in nearby areas. The contact had been neither vindictive nor friendly, but rather functional, with an emphasis on common technical understanding rather than personal history. Later that evening, as Darren relayed the event to Miles over a video conversation, his friend noticed the underlying meaning. You did not feel anything, did you? Miles observed perceptively. He was not angry or satisfied with his lowered position. There's no need to demonstrate your better success. No. Darren confirmed. He was quite surprised by the realization. It was like running into a former colleague from a job I left a long time ago. Professionally related, but personally distant. Miles approved of complete emotional detachment, which he saw as the final stage of genuine resolve. The assessment was correct. Darren had previously channeled icy, focused wrath into calculated retaliation. He no longer felt angry or vindicated against Wade Preston. The betrayal that had previously defined his strategic focus had been thoroughly processed and integrated. Transformed from driving motivation to historical background, Valerie experienced similar emotional resolution, albeit under different circumstances. Several months after the London conference, Darren got an unexpected email from his ex-wife. After her European marriage ended, she moved to the United States and established herself as a marketing consultant for premium firms. The message was concise and well-worded, recognizing previous wrongs without seeking reconciliation, and merely providing closure if Darren felt it was still necessary. His response was likewise restrained, acknowledging without blame, closure without a renewed connection. The exchange was quick yet crucial, formally finishing a chapter that had been informally closed years before. It produced neither satisfaction nor animosity, but rather a quiet understanding that those events existed primarily as context for the transformative journey they had accidentally launched. This final resolution of prior issues coincided with Signal Shield's most major extension to date, the introduction of worldwide implementation protocols that would allow for standardized security and democratization across international borders. The program was the culmination of Darren's strategic vision, transforming what began as an adaptation of corporate security for disadvantaged local organizations into a comprehensive worldwide framework for protection equity. The launch event at Sentinel Shield headquarters was well attended, with technology executives, policymakers, and security experts gathered to discuss the implications for global infrastructure protection. As Darren prepared for his presentation, he reflected on the entire trajectory of his professional career, from ambitious corporate director to revenge-focused strategist to global security architect. Are you nervous? Miles inquired. Joining him in the preparation room prior to the presentation helped him focus. Darren corrected with a little smile. The global protocols are our most complete framework ever. Miles highlighted that while the implementation hurdles will be enormous, the potential impact will be proportionally significant. In 5 years, we went from Project Phoenix to global security democratization, which was not what one of us had anticipated. When I showed you the CCTV photo of Valerie's automobile, the allusion to their beginning place made Darren reflect on how much his life had changed since that awful revelation. What began as personal and professional betrayal had sparked a journey of strategic genius, planned vengeance, and, finally, purposeful regeneration. They profoundly misjudged what they were creating, Darren noted quietly. Wade and Valerie. Their betrayal was intended to remove a barrier to their objectives. Instead, it resulted in something radically different than any of us expected. As he approached the presentation platform, Darren brought with him the deep realization that transformative journeys rarely follow predictable paths. The most valuable strategic insight was not predicting precise outcomes, but rather seeing emergent possibilities under shifting conditions. The audience that greeted him was the pinnacle of this change. Global technology leaders are convening not for business gain, but to safeguard equity. People who understand that concentrating security in resource-rich environments, while leaving vulnerability in resource-constrained ones, creates systemic risk for all interconnected systems. The Shield ecosystem started from a simple premise. Darren started addressing the assembled leaders. Protection should not be based entirely on resource availability. Security technology, which is concentrated solely in companies with significant financial and technological capabilities, causes vulnerability concentration in those who lack such resources, resulting in a systemic imbalance that eventually threatens all connected infrastructure. As he explained the global implementation procedures, Darren realized that his strategic brilliance had found its most significant use, not in corporate rise or calculating revenge, but in developing systems that protected people most vulnerable to impending threats. The Black King chess piece Leonard Preston had sent him years ago remained on his office shelf, a remembrance of a game decisively won. But next to it now stood a model of the Shield ecological architecture, indicating a different kind of victory, not conquering opponents, but defending people who couldn't defend themselves. Security distribution, rather than power concentration. The true substitute was not position or rank, but rather purpose itself. From ambition to vengeance and protection. From isolated success to systemic security. Strategic dominance to strategic distribution. In the end, Wade and Valerie's betrayal did not weaken Darren Blackwood. It had finally emancipated him. Their attempt to replace him had instead sparked his own transformation of limiting paradigms into more important ones. Their underestimating of his ability had produced the ideal environment for his most dramatic development. As Darren finished his presentation, he received an enthusiastic response. He felt neither triumph nor vindication, but rather the quiet joy of deliberate creation. The journey that began with betrayal had resulted in something far greater than vengeance or repair. It had resulted in the reconstruction of not only a career or a reputation, but also of a purpose. Not replacing one CEO with another, but replacing limitation with opportunity. Not calculating strategic revenge, but constructing strategic protection. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.